Yo, what's up everyone? It's Gringotts Hub, and today we're checking out, what if a goblin ritual revealed Harry was heir to 12 ancient houses and every Dark Lord had to bow to him. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Weight of What's Owed. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which felt wrong somehow. World-altering things, Harry had come to believe, should at least have the decency to announce themselves on a Monday, give you the whole week to fall apart. Tuesday just felt lazy. He was sitting at the kitchen table at number 4 Privet Drive, eating toast that Aunt Petunia had made deliberately thin, reading it for the third time while Vernon's newspaper rustled aggressively from across the table. The envelope was cream-colored with a wax seal Harry didn't recognize, not Hogwarts' crest, not the ministry's pompous eagle. This was older. A set of scales with a sword through the center, the wax the deep reddish-brown of old garnets. Mr. H. J. Potter, it read on the front, in handwriting so precise it looked engraved. The front bedroom. Second door on the left. Up the stairs. Not the cupboard under the stairs. He noticed that. The letter itself was exactly 12 lines long. Gringotts Bank, Diagon Alley, London, requests the presence of Mr. Harry James Potter for the purposes of a heritage and inheritance audit as mandated under Goblin Financial Compact Article 7, Clause 14. This audit is non-optional under British Wizarding Law, Statute of 1689, and has been co-signed by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Attendance is required on the morning of July 18. A ministry escort will arrive at your current residence at 9 o'clock. Formal robes are required. Failure to appear will result in the legal freezing of all assets currently held in trust. You will want to appear. Chief Ragnarok, Gringotts Bank. That last line. You will want to appear. Written in slightly different ink, slightly heavier pressure, like it had been added after everything else. Like Ragnarok had held the quill over the parchment for a moment before deciding to include it. Harry had read enough between lines in his life to understand that was the only part of the letter that actually mattered. Vernon's newspaper lowered precisely 3 inches. Who's that from? Bank, Harry said. Your bank. Suspicion thickened Vernon's voice like gravy left too long on the hob. Why would a bank be writing to you? Audit, Harry said, folding the letter. What kind of 16-year-old gets audited? Harry looked up at him. There were dark circles under his eyes that had been there since June, since a circular room in the Department of Mysteries where a curtained archway had swallowed the last person in the world who'd ever looked at him like he was worth something. He hadn't slept a full night since. He was tired in a way that had nothing to do with rest, and he had stopped pretending otherwise. The kind with a vault, Harry said, and went back to his toast. Vernon's newspaper went back up. The matter was apparently closed. The ministry escort arrived at 7 minutes past 9, 2 witches in charcoal robes who introduced themselves as Clearwater and Booth, offered Harry politely neutral expressions, and did not make small talk during the side-along apparition that deposited them all just outside the leaky cauldron. Harry had expected more, a lecture, perhaps, or the particular brand of nervous over-helpfulness that ministry officials usually deployed around him like a shield. Instead he got competence. It was almost refreshing. Diagon Alley was loud with summer crowds and Harry moved through it with his hood up, not because he was hiding exactly, but because he hadn't the energy for pointing and whispering today. Clearwater walked on his left. Booth walked on his right. Nobody bothered them. Gringotts gleamed white and slightly terrible in the morning sun, the way it always did, like something that had watched empires come and go and found all of them vaguely amusing. The marble stairs were crowded. Clearwater and Booth peeled off at the entrance, their job apparently done, and Harry walked through the bronze doors and then the silver doors into the familiar vast cavern of the banking hall. He'd expected a teller. A normal counter, one of the goblins in their neat uniforms, a form to sign maybe, the sort of bureaucratic tedium that the phrase heritage audit naturally suggested. What he got instead was a goblin he'd never seen before, standing in the middle of the marble floor waiting for him specifically, and 7 feet of very old, very serious intent radiating off the creature like heat off cobblestones in July. "Mr. Potter," the goblin said. "Not a question." "Yeah," Harry said. "I am Ragnarok, Chief of Gringotts." He said it the way people say things that are simply facts, no performance, no weight added artificially. Just information. "Follow me." He turned before Harry could respond and walked toward a door Harry had never noticed before, set into the left wall of the banking hall behind a pillar. It was iron, old iron, the kind that had gone nearly black with age, and carved across its surface in shallow relief were patterns that Harry's eyes kept sliding off, not because they were invisible but because they were old enough that some part of his brain didn't know how to categorize them. "What kind of audit needs the chief?" Harry asked, following. "The kind we should have conducted 11 years ago," Ragnarok said, without turning around, "when you first opened your vault." The iron door opened onto stairs rather than a cart track, which Harry hadn't expected. They went down for longer than seemed geographically reasonable, down past the levels where the vaults were, past the sounds of carts and the distant rumble of the underground, down into stone that felt genuinely ancient in the way that Hogwarts felt ancient, that particular weight of accumulated time that pressed against your awareness. The room at the bottom of the stairs was round, low-ceilinged, lit by a ring of torches that burned with light slightly too blue to be entirely comfortable. The floor was stone, but the stone had been worked, carved with concentric circles radiating outward from a central point, and at every intersection of circle and spoke were symbols that Harry's brain did the same sliding thing it had done at the door. In the center of the room stood a basin. Not the pensieve, nothing like the pensieve. This was narrower, taller, made of black stone, and the inside surface was dry and carved with the same sliding symbols. Beside it stood 3 other goblins, elderly in the way that ancient things are elderly, not frail but layered, like the rings of a tree. Harry stopped at the bottom of the stairs. "Someone want to tell me what this actually is?" Ragnarok turned to face him. In the blue torchlight his face was sharp planes and deep-set eyes that held something Harry hadn't expected to find in a goblin's expression, something that looked uncomfortably like guilt. "This," Ragnarok said, "is a lineage crucible. It is the oldest device in Gringotts' possession. Older than the bank itself. It was used, in the time before the Statute of Secrecy, to establish the full bloodline heritage of an individual, every magical house, every inherited title, every dormant claim that runs through their ancestry." He paused. "We are required by the new financial compact, signed last March, to conduct such audits for any individual whose vault shows inheritance flags." "Flags," Harry repeated. "What kind of flags?" "The kind," said one of the 3 older goblins, in a voice like gravel shifting, "that suggest a vault is holding approximately 1% of what it should be." The room went quiet. Even the torches seemed to dim slightly. Harry looked at Ragnarok. "Say that again." "Your vault, Mr. Potter, Vault 687, holds a reasonable sum for a single orphaned wizard of your background," Ragnarok said, each word chosen with the care of a man handling something fragile. "It does not hold the accumulated wealth, properties, titles, or political holdings of a bloodline that has been building for 900 years. The flags indicate redirection. Active, deliberate, and ongoing redirection of assets away from the primary vault." "Someone's been stealing from me," Harry said. "That," said Ragnarok, "is one word for it." Harry stood there for a moment. The exhaustion he'd been carrying since June was still there, but something had shifted underneath it, a slow, cold-hot ignition of something that wasn't quite anger yet. More like the feeling before anger. The moment when you realize you've been played for longer than you knew. "All right," he said. "What do I do?" The ritual was, outwardly, almost disappointingly simple. Harry stood in the center of the concentric circles. One of the elderly goblins, introduced only as Griphook Sr., no relation to the younger Griphook Harry had met before, drew a thin ceremonial blade across Harry's palm, not deep, just enough to pull a line of blood. Harry submitted to it without flinching. He'd had worse on a Quidditch pitch. The blood went into the lineage crucible. 3 drops. The stone absorbed them immediately, greedily, the way very dry earth takes rain. Then nothing happened for almost a minute, and Harry was starting to feel slightly embarrassed standing in the middle of a mystic circle in a basement when the basin lit. Not glowed. Lit, as if something inside it had caught fire, the blue-white light of it shooting upward in a column and then spreading sideways, and suddenly the carved symbols on the floor weren't just carvings anymore. They were alive, tracing lines of cold light across the stone, and the lines connected to each other and began forming shapes, and Harry stepped back, not in fear, just in the instinctive way you step back from something that's suddenly larger than expected. The shapes resolved into a tree. Not a family tree in the sense of a scroll with names on it, but an actual tree, made of light, root system spreading across the entire floor, canopy rising to and through the low ceiling. Each branch terminated in a seal. Each seal was distinct, different symbols, different structures, different weights to the magic they carried, and Harry could feel the differences, which surprised him, the sensation of 12 separate magical signatures pressing against his awareness like 12 different instruments all playing at once. 12 branches. 12 seals. The number didn't hit him for a moment. He was counting. Then he counted again. That can't be right, he said. No, Ragnarok agreed quietly. We did not think so either, the first time we ran preliminary calculations. We ran them 9 more times. 12. Harry turned to look at him. 12 houses. 12 houses, Ragnarok confirmed. Some of them you will have heard of. House Potter, your father's line, which you already knew, though even there the full extent of the holdings has been obscured. House Peveril, which should surprise you less than it will. House Gryffindor, yes, that Gryffindor. The founder's line has not been entirely extinguished, whatever people may have believed. He began naming them. Harry listened. Some names he recognized, Peveril, Gryffindor, Slytherin, and that last one made him go still, because Ragnarok said it without ceremony, without drama, the way you'd say and also there's a chair in the corner. Slytherin. Harry said. Through your mother's line, Ragnarok said. Lily Evans Potter was not Muggle-born in the sense the term is commonly used. She was a first-generation magical manifestation of a dormant line. It happens, periodically, when a magical bloodline runs so thin it appears to vanish and then resurfaces. The Evans family carried Slytherin blood so diluted it hadn't expressed in 7 generations. In Lily Evans, it expressed rather dramatically. Harry was quiet for a long moment. Voldemort thinks he's the last Slytherin heir. Voldemort, said Griphook Sr., in a tone that managed to convey enormous contempt in very little space, is a half-blood with a more recent and considerably less legitimate claim. Yes. 8 more names. 8 more ancient houses, some so old their primary languages weren't even English. House Emrys, which made Ragnarok pause before he said it, House Pendragon, which made Harry make a sound that wasn't quite a word, and several whose names were in old gobbledygook and translated to things like House of the First Warding and House of the Unbroken Seal. When Ragnarok finished, Harry had been standing in the center of the light tree for 4 minutes and the room felt smaller than it had before, pressed in on all sides by the weight of 12 bloodlines worth of accumulated magical history. There's something else, Harry said. He didn't know how he knew. Something in Ragnarok's posture. Ragnarok looked at the 3 elders. A moment of silent goblin communication passed between them. Then Ragnarok reached into his robes and produced a scroll that looked considerably older than the room they were standing in, the parchment the color of old teeth, the seal already broken, the ink inside faded to the red-brown of dried blood. The Magister Primus Compact, Ragnarok said. Drawn up in the year 843. Before the ministry. Before the statute. Before Hogwarts was finished being built. He unrolled it carefully, the parchment crackling with quiet protest. When 12 great houses coexist in a single bloodline, not accumulated over time by titles, but genuinely convergent, as yours are, the heir of that convergence is recognized under the oldest magical law as the Magister Primus. The first master. It is not a political title. It is a magical one. The compact is not a document written by men. It is a document that describes something that already exists in the nature of magic itself. Harry waited. The compact, Ragnarok continued, contains among its many provisions one that has never been invoked in recorded history, because the Magister Primus has never before existed, or if they have, they were prevented from knowing it. His dark eyes held Harry's without any flinching. Any practitioner of the dark arts who holds a formal title, any recognized Dark Lord, any holder of Dark Compact or Dark Inheritance, is required, upon the activation of a Magister Primus, to formally acknowledge that primacy. To bow. Not metaphorically. The magic is coercive. It will not ask. It will compel. And if they resist too long, it will begin to take. The torches. The light from the tree. The echoing quality of stone that had been underground since before anyone alive could remember. Harry said, "It will take what?" "Their power," said Griphook Sr. simply. "Piece by piece. The way a river takes a bank." The light tree pulsed. Harry felt it in his chest, all 12 seals, all 12 bloodlines, pressing against each other and pressing outward, pressing against him, and the feeling wasn't pleasant. It was the feeling of something very large trying to fit into a space that was sized for something merely normal. He took a breath. Let it out slowly. "So Voldemort," he said, "has to bow to me. Has to acknowledge you," Ragnarok said. "The form of it is his choice. The fact of it is not. And the other Dark Lords." Ragnarok was quiet for exactly one beat too long. "You knew there were others," Harry said. "We suspected," Ragnarok said carefully. "The compact does not distinguish between the Dark Lord your world knows about and the ones it does not." Something in his stomach went cold in a way that had nothing to do with fear. More like clarity. The particular cold of understanding that the problem you thought you were dealing with was the small visible portion of a much larger structure. "How many?" Harry said. "That," Ragnarok said, "is what we do not fully know. At minimum, 4. Harry looked at the tree of light still burning around him. 12 branches. 12 seals. 4 or more Dark Lords who had been operating, apparently, below the wizarding world's notice. A compact that predated everything and had been sitting dormant like a bomb with no fuse, waiting for someone like him to exist. And someone, one person or many people working together, had known. Had known and had spent years making sure he didn't. The redirected assets, Harry said. The 1% vault. Someone knew. The flags began, Ragnarok said, in 1981. The month after your parents died. The week you were placed with your mother's Muggle relatives. There it was. There was the cold, clear thing. Not rage, not yet. Something more structural than rage. The understanding that grief and deprivation and years of being managed and pointed and used had not been incidental. Had been constructed. That someone had looked at him as a baby and said he can never know and had then been very thorough about it. Harry stepped out of the light tree. The torches guttered. The light faded slowly, the branches contracting, the seals dimming but not going out, just waiting. He could still feel them. He thought he probably always would, now. I need documentation, he said. Everything. All 12 claims, the full asset audit, the compact, the historical precedent. I need it in writing, I need copies, and I need them certified by Gringotts under Goblin law, not ministry law. Ragnarok looked at him with an expression that might, in a human face, have been relief. We anticipated this request, he said, and produced a leather satchel from behind one of the elders, the kind of satchel that clearly had an undetectable extension charm on it because it was much too flat to hold what Harry already knew it contained. There's one more thing, Harry said. You said the audit should have happened 11 years ago. You said we're here because of new protocols signed in March. Who signed them? Who pushed for them? Ragnarok's mouth compressed into a very thin line. The push for new audit protocols came from three sources. A private petition from several Wisengamot members whose names we are not currently at liberty to disclose. A formal letter from the Department of Mysteries, which was unusual enough that we noted it. And a handwritten note submitted directly to my office by a party who asked to remain anonymous. And the anonymous note said only this. Ragnarok reached into a different fold of his robes and produced a small square of parchment. He held it out. Harry took it. He's 16. He's run out of time. Stop waiting and audit the boy. No signature. The handwriting was neat, slanted slightly left, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who'd been taught properly and then spent years unlearning formality. Harry had seen handwriting like that once before. In a letter. A letter he'd been given in his first year. He folded the note and put it in his pocket. His expression didn't change. One more question, he said. Yes, Mr. Potter. You've known. Not everything, but enough. You've known there were flags on my vault since 1981. 45 years of Goblin record-keeping and nobody mentioned it. He said it evenly, without accusation in his voice, the way you'd say it rained yesterday. Just a fact. Why? The three elder goblins were very still. Ragnarok clasped his hands in front of him. Goblin law, he said carefully, does not permit the volunteering of information to parties who have not asked. You did not ask. No one with proper standing asked on your behalf. The ministry had standing and did not inquire. Your guardian, Albus Dumbledore, had standing and did not inquire. A pause. We are not required to protect humans from their own failures to ask. But. And here something changed in his face, a slight, controlled shift that looked, on a goblin, remarkable. I have been chief of this bank for 93 years. I have watched a great deal. I have chosen, within the boundaries of Goblin law, to be part of the structure that conducted this audit the moment a legal mechanism existed to require it. He met Harry's eyes. That is as far as Goblin law allows me to go. But I want to be clear, Mr. Potter, that I have gone that far deliberately. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Then he held out his hand, his right hand, not the one that had been cut, the one that was steady and unhurt. Ragnarok looked at the hand. Something shifted in the room, the three elders exchanged the kind of glance that meant they were witnessing something that would be discussed for a long time. Goblin-human handshakes as equals were not common. They were not nothing. Ragnarok took Harry's hand and shook it. Thank you, Harry said. Meaning it. Don't get killed before you use what we've given you, Ragnarok said. It would be an extraordinary waste. He came out of Gringotts just past noon. The sun was high and the alley was at its summer peak, families with children, students shopping for the coming year, witches and wizards sitting outside Florian Fortescue's even though Florian Fortescue himself had been missing since late July and the shop was being run by his brother, who made acceptable gelato and spectacular sundaes but had never quite matched the original owner's ability to spontaneously know exactly what flavor you needed. Harry bought a sundae. Chocolate with caramel and something that tasted faintly of hazelnuts. He sat on the steps outside the shop with the satchel between his feet and the sundae in his hands and the note in his pocket and 12 seals humming quietly in the back of his chest like a tuning fork that had been struck and not muffled. He ate the entire thing. He needed to think and he thought better when his hands were occupied. That was something nobody had ever been patient enough to understand, that Harry Potter had never in his life made good decisions while standing still and doing nothing. He needed movement, or failing movement, something physical. Hermione sat and thought. Harry ate ice cream and felt the shape of things until they made sense. Here was the shape of it, then. Someone had redirected the assets of 12 ancient houses away from him, starting at the moment he had no one left to look after his interests. That meant they'd been watching. Known about the 12 houses before tonight. Known the Magister Primus was possible. And instead of preventing his birth or killing him as a child, which Voldemort had already attempted and failed, someone had tried a quieter approach. Keep him small. Keep him ignorant. Keep him manageable. Dumbledore had legal guardian status. Harry sat with that for a moment, the way you sit with something that might burn you. He didn't want it to be Dumbledore. He'd spent a year being furious at Dumbledore, and underneath the fury was something that still flinched from the implications, because Dumbledore being corrupt was a different problem than Dumbledore making bad choices out of fear. One was a betrayal. The other was a tragedy. He didn't know which it was yet. The anonymous note, though. He's 16. He's run out of time. That tone, urgent, personal, with the particular edge of someone who'd been holding a secret so long that releasing it felt like bleeding out. Someone who knew and had been waiting and had finally decided waiting was worse than the alternative. He'd figure that out later. What mattered now was what came next. The satchel had everything: 12 house claims, the compact, the asset audit showing a full history of redirections, and at the very bottom, folded in a separate piece of ancient parchment, what Ragnarok had called the activation acknowledgement. A single piece of paper that Harry could sign to formally activate his Magister Primus status. Once signed, Goblin law required Gringotts to notify the Wisengamot, the ICW, and every holder of a dark compact in the British Isles. He hadn't signed it yet. He'd wanted to think first. He thought now. He thought about Sirius falling through a curtain. He thought about a year of lessons where Dumbledore had shown him memories of a young Tom Riddle and told him this is what you're up against, as if understanding Voldemort's childhood was preparation for killing him. He thought about 11 years in a cupboard, 4 years of being stared at, a tournament that had been rigged to use him as a blood sacrifice, a graveyard in June 1995 where his blood had been used to bring a dead man back to life. He thought about the flags on his vault beginning the week he was placed with the Dursleys. He took out the activation acknowledgement. He borrowed a quill from the shop's small exterior table, where someone had left a pot of ink for writing orders. He signed his name, Harry James Potter, in the clear, unhurried hand of someone who had made up his mind. The paper didn't glow or shake or produce any dramatic effect. It simply absorbed the signature, the way the crucible had absorbed his blood, and then it was done. Somewhere in the underground chamber, Harry knew, the 12 seals had brightened. Somewhere across Britain, an unknown number of people who carried dark compact titles were feeling something they'd never felt before, a pressure in their magic, a pulling sensation at the root of their power, a compulsion that would not be denied. Harry put the quill back in the pot. He picked up the satchel. He stood up. He needed to find Hermione. The burrow was everything Privet Drive wasn't, loud and crooked and alive in the way that old houses get when they've been genuinely loved for a long time. Harry had been staying here for 3 days already, had arrived via order port key the same day Clearwater and Booth had delivered him back to Privet Drive, because Dumbledore had apparently decided that Privet Drive needed to last 2 more summers and 1 more week of it had satisfied whatever protective requirement the Blood Ward held. Hermione was in the garden when he arrived through the gate, sitting cross-legged on the grass with 3 books open in front of her and a 4th in her lap, doing the thing she did where she appeared to be reading all of them simultaneously. She looked up when the gate clicked. She saw his face. "What happened?" she said, and it wasn't a question. Harry sat down across from her on the grass. Ron appeared at the back door of the burrow, took one look at them, and disappeared inside. He came back 60 seconds later with 3 mugs of tea, handed them out with the calm efficiency of someone who had long since learned that certain conversations required lubrication, and sat down beside Harry without a word. Harry opened the satchel and put the documents between them. He talked for 40 minutes. He didn't summarize, he told them everything, in the order it had happened, including the tone of Ragnarok's voice and the sensation of the light tree in his chest and the handwriting on the anonymous note and the cold clear thing he'd felt when Ragnarok said the flags had started in 1981. Hermione didn't interrupt. She listened in the particular way she listened when something was both very important and very complicated, absolutely still, tea held in both hands, eyes moving between his face and the documents she was already reading as he spoke. Ron listened the way Ron always listened, elbows on knees, brow furrowed, watching Harry's face. When Harry finished, the garden was quiet except for the chickens and the distant sound of George Weasley dropping something very heavy on an upper floor. 12, Hermione said. Yeah. Harry, do you understand, the Peveril line alone is enough to, she stopped herself. Took a breath. And Gryffindor. The Founder's line. I know. And Slytherin. Which means Voldemort has a weaker claim than me. Yes. I know. She looked at him. You signed the activation. At the Sunday shop. Ron made a noise. Of course you did. Was I supposed to wait? Harry said. No, Hermione said immediately. No, you were absolutely right. Waiting would only give whoever redirected the assets more time to, she stopped again. Her jaw tightened. The Dursleys. 11 years. Harry, the money that should have been yours, the properties, I know, Harry said, and the thing in his voice made her stop. She looked at him properly. He wasn't devastated. He wasn't falling apart. He was drinking tea and watching the chickens, and there was something in his expression that she had only seen a handful of times, after the graveyard, after Sirius, the particular stillness of someone who has passed through shock and come out the other side of it somewhere harder and more deliberate. What are you going to do? Ron said. Use it, Harry said simply. Everything they tried to hide. I'm going to use every single piece of it. He set down the mug. But first I need to know everything about the Magister Primus compact. Everything. Every provision, every historical precedent, every loophole and every mechanism. I need to know exactly what I have before I walk into a room with anyone who matters. Hermione was already reaching for the satchel. There's a library, she said, pulling out the sheaf of Ragnarok's historical documentation. A real one. Not Hogwarts, the Wisengamot's archive, in London. I've been trying to get access for 2 years and they keep saying members only. Harry. She looked up. You have 12 Wisengamot seats. Harry blinked. Each house, she said, with the particular controlled excitement of someone who has just seen all the pieces of a very large puzzle align, would have had at minimum 1 Wisengamot seat. Most of the old houses had 2 or 3. The Gryffindor seat alone is a founding seat, it has special voting weight. She was already counting on her fingers. You could walk into the Wisengamot holding more votes than the entire current Dark Sympathizer block combined. More than Dumbledore, Harry said quietly. The words sat between them in the summer air. Hermione put down the documents. Ron's brow had unknitted itself from worried to something more complicated. You think it's him, Ron said. Not accusing. Just asking. I think, Harry said carefully, that the handwriting on the anonymous note looked like someone who'd been trained to write formally and then spent years being informal. And that Dumbledore has legal guardian status and never once, in 5 years, asked Gringotts what I actually owned. He paused. I think it might not be as simple as him being the villain. But I think he knows more than he said. And I think I'm done letting people decide what I need to know. Ron nodded slowly. Hermione was quiet for a moment. He had reasons, she said. Probably. He usually does. I know, Harry said. People with reasons are the most dangerous kind. She looked at him for a long beat. Then she picked up the Magister Primus compact and opened it. Right, she said. Then let's learn everything. They were still at it when Mrs. Weasley called them for dinner, and they ate at the crowded Burrow table with Fred and George arguing about a new product and Ginny watching Harry with the careful attention she'd been deploying since he'd arrived 3 days ago, and Arthur asking Hermione about Muggle computing with the desperate enthusiasm of a man who had almost but not quite understood electricity. Harry ate everything on his plate. Talked when talked to. Laughed at Fred's joke about the Minister for Magic and a Niffler. He was present, genuinely present, not performing it. But underneath the dinner and the noise and the warm familiar chaos of the Burrow, in the background of everything, he could feel the 12 seals. Quiet now. Waiting. The sensation of a tuning fork that had been struck and was resonating, carrying through the ground and the stone and the old bones of the world, looking for other vibrations to meet. Somewhere out there, someone had already felt it. Somewhere out there, someone was very uncomfortable. Good, Harry thought, and asked George to pass the potatoes. Chapter 2, The Compact's Teeth. The compulsion hit Lucius Malfoy at 3 in the morning. He was in his study, the good one on the second floor of Malfoy Manor, where the windows looked out over the grounds and the lake caught moonlight in a way that had always, privately, pleased him. He'd been unable to sleep, a condition he'd grown accustomed to since his master's return, since the dark mark on his arm had gone from a faded scar to something that breathed, and had come down to review correspondence. Mundane things. Estate matters. A letter from his solicitor about the Nocturne Alley property. Then it hit. Not pain, exactly, though pain was somewhere in the architecture of it. It was more like pressure. Like something enormous had pressed a thumb against the root of his magic, that deep interior place where his power lived, the place he'd never been able to describe to anyone because it predated language, and pushed. Not hard enough to hurt. Hard enough to make the direction absolutely clear. Acknowledge. He was on his feet before he'd decided to stand, his chair scraping back hard against the floorboards. The word wasn't in his head the way thoughts were. It was in his magic the way a heartbeat was in his chest, involuntary, rhythmic, insistent. Acknowledge. He stood in the center of his study with his hands at his sides and every refined piece of composure he'd spent 40 years assembling, and he breathed through it. It faded after 90 seconds. Enough for him to sit back down. Enough for him to pour himself a measure of fire whiskey with a hand that was only marginally unsteady. He stared at the drink for a long moment. Then he went to the fireplace, threw in a handful of flue powder, and said, "Mulciber. Wake up." Across Britain, in the same 3-hour window between midnight and dawn, 7 other people woke up with variants of the same feeling. Dolohov woke from a dead sleep gasping, his dark mark blazing cold rather than hot, the pressure in his chest so sudden he thought for a moment it was cardiac. It wasn't. He lay in his Berlin flat staring at the ceiling and knew, in the way that dark compact holders know things through the bond, that something had fundamentally changed in the structure of magical Britain. Rookwood, who had been out of Azkaban for 8 months and had been spending his freedom productively in the service of his master, felt it while in the middle of a decryption exercise. He dropped his quill. Sat very still. The pressure faded. He picked up the quill, put it down, and spent 40 minutes cross-referencing ancient magical compacts, a practitioner's history before finding what he was looking for and then sitting for another 20 minutes being perfectly motionless because the implications required it. Bellatrix Lestrange, who felt everything connected to her master more acutely than any of them and who therefore had the most violent experience of the compulsion, screamed once, not in pain but in fury, and put her fist through a wall. And Tom Riddle, who had not been Tom Riddle in a very long time and was currently occupying a manor in the Scottish Highlands that he had repurposed from its previous owner without much sentimentality, felt it arrive like a cold wave and stood perfectly, completely, absolutely still for a very long time. He did not scream. He did not destroy anything. He thought. Hermione had the compact's provisions sorted into 3 categories by morning. She'd stayed up until 2, slept 4 hours, and been back at the garden table before anyone else was awake. By the time Harry came down she had filled 12 pages of a fresh notebook with organized, cross-referenced notes in the small precise handwriting that she used for things that actually mattered, and she had a cup of cold tea at her elbow that she had forgotten to drink. "Morning," Harry said, dropping into the chair across from her and taking in the scope of the operation. "Did you sleep?" "Adequately," she said, which meant no. He went inside, made 2 fresh cups of tea and a plate of toast, came back, put one of each in front of her. She accepted them automatically without looking up. "The compact has 3 operative sections," she said. "The first is the heritage provisions, that's the part that establishes what the Magister Primus is and what they're entitled to. Properties, titles, Wisengamot seats, and something called house magic, which is, she flipped back 2 pages, not a term that appears anywhere in modern magical literature, which is interesting in itself. What does Ragnarok's documentation say about it? That each of the 12 houses had its own magical tradition. Not just spell work, something more fundamental. A kind of attunement. And that a Magister Primus, holding all 12, would theoretically have access to all 12 traditions simultaneously. She looked up for the first time. Harry, that includes Slytherin's Parseltongue tradition, obviously. But it also includes what the documentation calls Gryffindor's wardcraft, the ability to build and break wards at a level we just don't see anymore. And Emery's tradition, which is listed as, she checked her notes, primordial intention magic. Which means basically nothing to me right now, but the fact that it's in the same category as Merlin's own tradition is not nothing. Harry ate toast. And the second section? The compact obligations. That's where the Dark Lord acknowledgement requirement lives. She'd flagged this section with 3 separate colored tabs. Here's what's interesting, the compact doesn't just require acknowledgement. It requires what it calls formal recognition of primacy, and there are specific conditions attached to each Dark Compact holder's obligation that vary based on the nature and age of their own compact. She paused. For Voldemort, whose compact is a self-created dark ritual from the 1940s and therefore relatively recent and relatively weak by these standards, the obligation is the most complete. He has to acknowledge you as Magister Primus in a formal setting. Not just feel the compulsion privately. And if he refuses? The compact calls it erosion. His own magical compact, the one that supports the Horcruxes, the one that sustains his current form, the one that binds his Death Eaters to him, starts to degrade. Slowly at first. Then faster. She held his gaze. Harry, the magic in this compact isn't a trick or a political mechanism. It's descriptive. It describes something real about how magical power is structured. The Magister Primus isn't a title someone made up, it's a node. A convergence point. And every dark compact that exists operates in opposition to that node. They can't coexist without the darker one acknowledging the primacy of the older one. Ron, who had appeared silently and had been standing in the back doorway for the last 2 minutes with a bowl of cereal, said, "So Voldemort has to bow or his bits fall off." "That is," Hermione said, a reductive but not entirely inaccurate summary. Harry was quiet for a moment. "You said 3 sections." She closed her notebook. "Open it at a different tab." "The 3rd section is the part that Ragnarok didn't walk us through in detail," she said, and her voice had changed, careful, the way it got when she was about to say something she was still processing herself. "It's called the Warden Clause. And it's not about the Dark Lords. It's about the compact itself. About why it exists." She passed him the section of Ragnarok's translation. He read it. The Warden Clause established, in the careful language of 9th century magical law, that the Magister Primus was not merely a title of authority. They were a custodian. The 12 houses had been, in the original pre-Hogwarts era of British wizardry, the 12 founding pillars of organized magical society, each one responsible for a different aspect of the magical world structure. Education, law, defense, healing, trade, knowledge, warding, binding, transformation, divination, elemental communion, and what the compact called the keeping of the deep magic. Together they had agreed that should their bloodlines converge, the convergence point would carry responsibility for all 12 functions. Not just power. Responsibility. Harry sat with that for a while. "Someone read this," he said finally. "Whoever redirected the assets. They read this and they thought that it was a threat," Hermione said. "Yes. But Harry, I think it's more specific than that. Look at what the 12 functions are. Education, that's Hogwarts, technically, under Dumbledore's control. Law, the Wisengamot, currently structured to favor the old families. Defense, the Auror Office. Healing, St. Mungo's trade, she stopped. Someone who understood this compact wouldn't just see a powerful person coming. They'd see someone who had a legal and magical claim to restructure every institution in Wizarding Britain. Which is exactly what someone who'd spent 100 years quietly controlling those institutions would be terrified of, Harry said. Hermione went still. Not Voldemort, Harry said. He only came back properly 2 years ago. This started in 1981. The redirection started before Voldemort was anything other than a memory. He looked at her. Someone else. Ron sat down. His cereal was forgotten. Someone who knew about Voldemort and wasn't him. Someone who was already in control, Harry said. And wanted to stay that way. Voss, Hermione said quietly. The name had been at the bottom of Ragnarok's additional documentation, a single page, careful and clearly written reluctantly, titled Persons of Interest Relating to Dark Compact Activity, Shadow Category. 4 names. 3 of them were known to exist only as historical rumors. The 4th was listed with a small notation, active. European operations. 2 centuries of confirmed contract activity. Identity unverified but compound evidence compelling. Malachar Voss. I did some research last night, Hermione said, reaching for a separate stack of pages. Before the Goblin documentation, I mean. The name comes up in 4 places in standard wizarding history texts, all as references to other things. Once in a footnote about the 1850 Magical Trade Accord, there's an unattributed letter opposing it that historians have never been able to source. Once in a Ministry archive file about the International Confederation of Wizards 1912 restructuring, which apparently someone lobbied very hard against and then the lobbying just stopped when the restructuring passed. Once in a Hogwarts library book about the founding of the Department of Mysteries. She paused. And once in Dumbledore's own published writing, from 1947. He mentions, in an essay about Grindelwald, that Grindelwald had a rival for influence in the German magical community, someone he calls the Patient One, and that this rival was notable for operating by removing obstacles rather than confronting them. Dumbledore wrote that he found this approach more dangerous than Grindelwald's. The garden was quiet. Dumbledore knew, Ron said. Dumbledore knew about Voss, Hermione said. Whether he connected Voss to Harry's inheritance situation, I don't know. But given the anonymous note, he figured it out eventually, Harry said. And panicked. And instead of telling me, sent a note to Gringotts. He leaned back in his chair. Which is the same pattern. Same thing, different scale. Trust in his own judgment over telling me the truth. Are you angry at him? Ron said. Harry looked at his toast. I don't know yet, he said honestly. Ask me after I've talked to him. The letter to Dumbledore was brief. Harry wrote it himself, 3 drafts, each one shorter than the last. The final version was 4 sentences. I went to Gringotts yesterday. I know about the 12 houses and the compact. I know about the asset redirections. I'd like to have a conversation with you in person, at your convenience, about what you know and haven't told me. No anger in the words. No accusation. Just the clean, flat surface of a request that both of them would understand was not actually a request. He sealed it, sent it with the Weasley's family owl, and went back to the garden. 3 days passed. They were not idle days. Hermione built what she called a legal architecture document, a 40-page sequential argument for how Harry's claims would be presented to the Wisengamot, ordered by historical precedent with citations, cross-referenced against current ministry law to identify where ancient law superseded modern statute. She was, Harry thought, absolutely terrifying when she had a project. She ate meals at the garden table with documents propped against her water glass and once very nearly sat on a chicken. Ron cross-referenced every name in the 12 house records against the Weasley family's considerable unofficial knowledge of wizarding genealogy. The Weasleys, as one of the oldest remaining blood families, had a generations-deep oral history that turned out to be surprisingly useful. Molly, when she understood what they were doing, sat at the table for 2 solid hours pointing at names and saying things like, "Oh, those blacks, the Cavendish branch, they had a property dispute with the Potters in 1743 that went on for 11 years in House Emery's. Arthur, come and look, we have a connection to the Emery's line through your grandmother's side. I always told you there was magic in that family that wasn't standard." Arthur looked at the documentation with the expression of someone having a very large number of things simultaneously confirmed. He didn't say much. But he did quietly send a letter to his contact at the Wiesengemot archive, requesting visitor access for a researcher with 12 house credentials. Harry noticed the letter going. Didn't say anything. Felt something complicated and warm. On the second evening Dumbledore wrote back. The letter was longer than Harry's had been, but not by much, and it was, Harry read it twice, careful. Not evasive. Careful. There was a difference. "I would like to speak with you, Harry. I will come to the Burrow on Thursday if that suits. I want you to know that I am, and I recognize the inadequacy of this word, sorry that you found out this way. I should have told you. I told myself many things about why I didn't, and I now understand that they were insufficient. I will explain everything I know on Thursday. I ask only that you allow me to explain it in sequence, because the shape of it matters. Your grandfather entrusted something to my keeping that I was not worthy of. I intend to rectify that." Harry sat with the letter for a while. Your grandfather. Not your parents. His grandfather, James Potter's father, Fleamont Potter, who had died of dragon pox the year before Voldemort had killed his parents, who Harry knew essentially nothing about, who was apparently relevant to something that Dumbledore considered himself unworthy of. He added it to the pile of things to think about after Thursday. On the third morning, something else happened. Harry woke before everyone else, which was unusual. He'd been sleeping better at the Burrow than he'd slept since June, not well, but better, the kind of sleep that was actual rest rather than the shallow exhausted unconsciousness he'd been managing at Privet Drive. He came downstairs at 6:30, put the kettle on, and stood at the kitchen window watching the morning come in over the Weasley garden. The 12 seals were stronger this morning. He'd been noticing that, a gradual intensification over 3 days, like the activation was still settling, the magic still orienting. It didn't feel wrong. It felt like a muscle he hadn't known he had, making its presence known after too long of not being used. He was halfway through his tea when he felt something completely different. Not the seals. Something external. A pressure in the opposite direction, not coming from inside him but pressing against him from outside, finding the seals and recoiling from them. Something large and dark and very far away that had just realized what it was pressing against. Harry put his mug down very carefully. The sensation lasted about 30 seconds. Then it withdrew, not panicking, but deliberately, the way a hand pulls back from a hot surface with control rather than shock. Whoever that was, they were not someone who lost their composure. They'd touched the edge of his awareness, understood what they'd found, and retreated to think. Harry pulled on boots and a jacket and went out into the garden alone in the early light. He sat in the same spot where he and Hermione had been working for 3 days and he felt the shape of what had just touched him. Not Voldemort, he knew what Voldemort's magic felt like, the hot sour wrongness of it, and this had been nothing like that. This had been cold and patient and old. Not ancient the way the compact was ancient. Old the way a person could be old if they'd had 200 years to learn patience. Voss had just found him. The fact that it had been a probe rather than an attack said something important. Voss didn't want a fight, or not yet, not directly. He wanted information. He'd reached out through whatever dark compact sensitivity his power allowed and found Harry's new signature, the 12 seals burning like a lighthouse in the magical landscape of Britain, and he'd withdrawn to think. Harry sat in the garden with the dew soaking into his jeans and thought back. He thought about what it meant that Voss had spent 45 years trying to prevent this and had now, suddenly, failed. He thought about what a patient man did when a plan he'd spent half a century constructing collapsed overnight. He thought about the note, he's 16. He's run out of time. Voss would know that note had worked. He'd know the audit had happened. He was recalibrating now, trying to decide what approach had any chance of working against someone he'd been trying to suppress. A patient man who operated by removing obstacles rather than confronting them would not, Harry decided, lead with open warfare. He'd lead with an offer. Harry went back inside, refilled his tea, and started getting dressed for the day. Dumbledore arrived on Thursday at 11, through the flue rather than the door, which Molly had agreed to only after significant internal conflict visible on her face. He was wearing deep purple robes and no hat, which made him look older somehow. The absence of the hat reduced his silhouette to something closer to merely a tall old man rather than the monument he became when fully assembled. He looked at Harry across the Weasley kitchen and Harry looked back at him. Arthur had tactfully taken the other children out to the garden. Molly stood at the sink pretending to be busy with dishes, because she absolutely was not going anywhere and everyone including Dumbledore understood this. Hermione and Ron sat on either side of Harry at the kitchen table in the posture of people who were staying. Dumbledore sat down. For a moment he looked at the tabletop. Then he looked up and the thing in his expression was not the careful measured wisdom that Harry associated with him. It was, simply, exhaustion of the same species as Harry's own but much older, the exhaustion of someone who had been holding something heavy for too long. Your grandfather, Dumbledore said, came to me in 1969. Fleamont Potter was not a man who asked for help easily, so when he came to me I understood it was serious. He paused. He'd discovered the redirections. Not all of them, not the full scope of the 12 houses, he hadn't found that yet, but he'd been doing his own investigation after finding anomalies in the Potter Vault records, and he traced 3 streams of diverted funds to a network of shell accounts that ran through 7 different banks in 5 countries. Hermione's quill was moving. She'd had it ready. He'd also discovered something else, Dumbledore said. He'd found a name attached to the shell structure. Not a full identity, more of a shadow, a trail. But consistent enough that he was certain it was a single actor, and old enough that he'd been operating before Fleamont's grandfather's grandfather was born. He looked at Harry. He'd found Voss. And you told him, Harry began. I told him I knew, Dumbledore said simply. That I had known since 1947, when I began investigating Grindelwald's networks and found the edges of a different network running underneath them. Older. Quieter. Patient. He was quiet for a moment. Voss is not a name many people have heard. He has spent 2 centuries ensuring that. He operates entirely through intermediaries, through financial structures, through the very boring and very effective tool of institutional inertia. He doesn't need soldiers. He needs people in the right chairs making the right decisions, and he has spent 200 years placing those people. He was behind the asset redirections, Harry said. He initiated them, Dumbledore said. Others maintained them, because others had been told to and had never questioned why. The ministry officials who set up the redirected accounts in 1981 were following instructions they'd received from people who had received instructions, and so on back through several layers. Most of the people in the chain had no idea who was at the top of it. Some didn't know there was a chain at all. He met Harry's eyes. I want to be very clear, Harry. I am not telling you this to excuse myself. What I did was take the information your grandfather gave me, add it to what I already knew, and decide that I could manage the situation better than anyone else could. I told myself I was protecting you. You were protecting the plan, Harry said. Dumbledore didn't flinch. Yes. I thought, if Harry can defeat Voldemort without knowing about his full inheritance, then there's time afterward. Time to deal with Voss once Voldemort is gone. I thought the smaller enemy first and then the larger one. A pause. I was wrong. Not only because the strategy was arrogant, but because I did not account for the timeline. The compact, Hermione said. You knew about it. Your grandfather found it in 1969 and gave me his research. Yes. He looked at her. The compact has a provision I have not mentioned yet. If the Magister Primus reaches the age of majority, 17, without having activated their status, the convergence seals begin to degrade. Over time, sometimes decades, sometimes faster depending on external pressures, the bloodline alignment dissolves. The 12 houses remain separate. The possibility of a Magister Primus does not recur in that bloodline. Ron said, so someone had to tell Harry before his birthday in July. Or the chance was gone forever, Dumbledore said. And Voss, who has known about the compact for considerably longer than I have, has been waiting for that birthday. He expected the degradation. He expected that without anyone to intervene, the seals would simply fade. You waited too long, Harry said. I waited too long, Dumbledore agreed. You sent the anonymous note. A beat. I did. Harry looked at him. Was any of it about me? Not the plan, not Voldemort, not the long game. Was any of the reason you finally sent the note actually about me? About what I was owed? The kitchen was very quiet. Outside a chicken was being indignant about something. Dumbledore took a long breath. When I wrote the note, he said slowly, I had spent 3 weeks arguing with myself about strategy. Timelines. Voldemort. Voss. The implications of the compact for the war. Every rational consideration. He paused. And then I picked up the quill and I thought about a boy who had been put in a cupboard because I decided it was necessary, who had been pointed at Voldemort like a weapon because I decided it was necessary, who had lost his godfather because I kept him in the dark because I decided. He stopped. The note was about you, he said quietly. The late arrival of that decision does not make it insufficient as much as I might wish otherwise. Harry sat with that. It wasn't enough. He knew it wasn't enough, and Dumbledore knew it wasn't enough, and the fact that they both knew it gave it a kind of honesty that made it more than nothing. Tell me everything you know about Voss, Harry said. Dumbledore talked for 3 hours. What they had by the time he left was a shape. Not a full picture. Voss was too old, too careful, too thoroughly hidden for a full picture, but a shape. 200 years of strategic moves. The 1803 collapse of the international Goblin trade accord that Ragnarok had mentioned, that had set back Goblin-Wizard financial relations by a century, Voss's work, traced through 3 intermediaries. The 1912 ICW restructuring that had removed the old Council of House Representatives and replaced them with ministry delegates, Voss's work again, because the old council had included house magic practitioners who might eventually have noticed the convergent signatures in Harry's bloodline. The 1981 asset redirections, Voss's direct order, Dumbledore believed, issued within days of Voldemort's fall, because the fall of Voldemort had removed one layer of chaos under which Voss had been operating and the Magister Primus question suddenly became urgent. He controlled financial infrastructure. He controlled portions of the ICW. He had people inside the British ministry. Dumbledore was certain of at least 2, one in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and one in the Wizengamot itself, though he didn't have names. He had people inside Hogwarts, one person, Dumbledore believed, in a role that gave them access to student records, which explained how Voss had known when Harry's seals were close to degrading. He operated out of somewhere in mainland Europe. He had never been photographed, never been formally identified, never appeared in any official record under his own name. He was known to be a wizard, probably a very powerful one, though the nature of his power was unclear since he never used it directly. He was known to be old enough that the question of how he had sustained his life for 2 centuries was one nobody had been able to answer. And he was known to be intelligent, patient, and, in Dumbledore's carefully chosen word, civilized, in the sense that a trap was civilized. Everything deliberate. Nothing wasted. No cruelty for its own sake, only cruelty when it served a purpose, and therefore cruelty that was much harder to see coming. When Dumbledore left through the flue, the kitchen felt slightly larger. Harry sat back. Ron was reading back through his notes. Hermione was writing a summary. He's going to contact me, Harry said. Hermione and Ron both looked up. Voss, Harry said. He probed me 3 days ago, before dawn. He felt the seals. He knows the suppression didn't work. He knows the compact is active. Harry looked at the cold fireplace. He's not going to attack me. That's not how he operates. He's going to come with an offer. What kind of offer? Ron said. The kind that sounds reasonable, Harry said. The kind that says we have the same enemies and we should work together. The kind that reframes what he's been doing as protection rather than control. He thought about the probe, the cold patience of it, the deliberate withdrawal. He's had 45 years to construct a narrative about Harry Potter. He'll have figured out exactly which version of the story I'd be most likely to believe. What do we do when he contacts us? Hermione said. Harry looked at the satchel, at Ragnarok's documents, at the 12 house seals burning quietly in his chest. We already know what he knows, he said. We know about the redirections, the compact, the timeline, we know the structure of what he's built. He doesn't know how much we know. He paused. So when he contacts us, we listen. We take everything useful. And we make it very clear that we are not what he was planning for. You want to use the meeting to get intelligence, Hermione said. And to send a message, Harry said. One that tells him what kind of problem he's dealing with. He stood up. But before any of that, we have somewhere to be. The Wizengamot was in session the following Tuesday. Harry knew because Hermione had been tracking the schedule with the focus of a general tracking troop movements. The summer session was largely procedural, it didn't deal with major legislation until autumn, but it was formally constituted, which meant that the ancient rules of the compact applied, all seat holders were required to be represented. 12 seats had been empty for 16 years, their vote weights going uncounted, their presence a quiet distortion in every decision the Wizengamot had made in that time. That was about to stop. They went the night before to the Ministry of Magic, through visitors' entrance, Harry in the formal robes Molly had quietly altered to fit him that morning without being asked. He had the satchel. Hermione had her architectural document. Ron had, at the last minute, put on the dress robes he'd last worn to the Yule Ball with an expression of profound personal offense. The Wizengamot clerk's office was staffed at 9 in the evening by a single man named Whitmore who had the specific quality of someone who had spent 30 years processing paperwork and had elevated it to an art form. He looked at Harry when they arrived. He looked at the satchel. He looked at the Gringotts certified seal on the top document. I need to file a seat holder registration, Harry said. 12 of them. For the Tuesday session. Whitmore stared at the documents for an extremely long time. 12, he said. 12, Harry confirmed. Whitmore reached under his desk and produced a very thick manual. He checked 3 different sections. He checked the Gringotts certification twice, holding it up to the light. He filled in a form. He went into a back room and came out with another man who read the same documents and looked at Harry with the expression of a man renegotiating his understanding of his Tuesday morning. This is all in order, the second man said, in a voice that suggested he genuinely wished it weren't. Good, Harry said pleasantly. The chamber will need to be notified, please notify them, Harry said. I'd like everyone to know I'm coming. Back at the Burrow, late, the house quiet and warm, Harry lay on the narrow bed in the Weasley guest room and looked at the ceiling. Through the open window came the smell of garden and summer and grass, and the night sky was doing what the night sky did when you were in the country, being enormous and somewhat overwhelming. He could feel the seals. He'd been feeling them continuously since the Crucible, but tonight there was something different. Not the external probe of 3 days ago. Something gentler. More like resonance. Like an instrument responding to something in the air. He thought about what Ragnarok had said about house magic. Each of the 12 traditions. Gryffindor's wardcraft. Emery's primordial intention. The things he hadn't accessed yet, hadn't even begun to understand. He thought about the sensation when he'd signed the activation. No drama. Just a pen on paper and 12 seals brightening. And somewhere across Britain, dark compact holders had woken up wrong. He thought about Voss's probe. The patience of it. The intelligence. He thought about Tuesday. Outside the window, an owl called once and went quiet. The night was still. Somewhere far away, in whatever fastness Voldemort was currently occupying, a Dark Lord was calculating something, turning over the problem of the compulsion like a stone, looking for what was underneath. And Harry, who was 16 and tired and had 12 bloodlines worth of old magic humming in his chest, felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not peace, exactly. Direction. He closed his eyes and slept properly, for the first time since June. Chapter 3, Courts and Courtiers. The Wizengamot chamber was older than the ministry building it sat inside. That was one of those facts that most people didn't think about, that the current Ministry of Magic had been constructed around an existing structure rather than the other way around, that somewhere in the basement levels of a building that smelled of polish and bureaucratic anxiety was a room that predated it by 6 centuries, its walls original stone rather than the modernized marble of the atrium above. The chamber seated 200, in tiered rows of seats arranged in a horseshoe around a central floor, and the seats were old wood, dark with age, carved at the back with the insignia of the house that had originally filled them. 12 of those seats, distributed across the upper tier where the oldest house seat sat, had been empty for 16 years. Harry walked in through the chamber's main entrance at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning and every head in the room turned. He was wearing the Potter formal robes, black with silver detailing at the collar and cuffs, the Potter crest on the left breast, which Hermione had pulled from the satchel documentation and Molly had embroidered onto the robe in 2 hours flat the night before, working with the concentrated intensity of someone who understood that presentation was its own kind of argument. He had his wand at his hip. He carried nothing else. The satchel was with Hermione, who was in the public gallery above with Ron, the documents organized by priority, ready to produce whatever was needed. He walked down the central aisle at a pace that was not hurried and not slow. The chamber was full. Fuller than a standard summer session had any right to be, which told Harry that Whitmore or his colleague had done exactly what Harry had asked and made sure everyone knew. The Minister for Magic, Rufus Scrimgeour, 3 months into a tenure that he was clearly finding more complicated than anticipated, sat in the ministerial chair at the head of the horseshoe with the expression of a man trying to decide which of several unpleasant things was happening. Beside him, Percy Weasley sat as a junior ministerial aide with the expression of someone who had seen Harry Potter walk into a room and was performing very hard the emotion of not recognizing him. Dumbledore was present, in his role as Chief Warlock. He sat in the presiding chair at the chamber's focal point, in purple robes and the half-moon glasses, and when Harry came down the aisle their eyes met briefly. Dumbledore's expression was unreadable. Harry looked away first. At the doorway behind Harry, Ragnarok entered. That was when the murmur started, not at Harry, who the Wizengamot could at least pretend was a procedural novelty, but at the sight of the Chief of Gringotts in his formal banking attire, because goblins did not come to the Wizengamot chamber. It was not done. It had never been done. The goblins' refusal to participate in wizard governance was one of the foundational conditions of the post-rebellion peace, and Ragnarok's presence here today was therefore either a violation of several treaties or a declaration that the treaties in question didn't apply to this situation. Ragnarok walked to the center of the floor and stood, facing the presiding chair. Chief Ragnarok, Dumbledore said, in the calm, carrying voice that he used when he was managing something. Gringotts is not typically represented in this chamber. Typically, Ragnarok said, the ancient compact provisions do not apply. Today they do. Gringotts attends as authenticating authority for a heritage claim of the First Order. He reached into his robes and produced a document, goblin sealed, the garnet wax unmistakable from across the room. He placed it on the clerk's table. The authentication is a matter of goblin law and is therefore not subject to challenge within this chamber. I am here as witness, not as participant. I will not be speaking again unless the authenticity of the documents is questioned. He stepped back. He stood to the right of the clerk's table with his hands clasped and his expression the particular goblin expression that meant he was watching everything and could wait indefinitely. Harry reached the center of the floor. Scrimgeour leaned forward. He was a man who looked like something built for a specific purpose, broad-shouldered, leonine, with the sharp eyes of someone who'd spent 30 years as an Auror before ascending to politics. He was not stupid. He was not weak. He looked at Harry with the calculating attention of someone who was already 3 moves into trying to figure out how to control this. "Mr. Potter," he said. "I understand you have some kind of claim to file with this body." 12, Harry said. "But we can take them together if it's easier." The clerk, a woman named Hopkirk who Harry recognized distantly as the person who'd sent him underage magic warning letters, spread the Gringotts documentation in front of her with the precise movements of someone who had been thoroughly briefed and was profoundly unsure how to feel about it. She cleared her throat. "The presiding body has received, as of this morning, heritage claims for the following seats," she said, and read the list. 12 names. 12 houses. Each one landing in the chamber like a stone in still water, ripples moving outward, expressions shifting, members leaning to speak in low voices to each other. When she reached Slytherin, the chamber went sharply quiet. Then louder. Several people spoke at once, objections, not coherent ones, just the noise of institutional surprise finding its voice. Dumbledore raised a hand. Quiet fell. "The chair recognizes the heritage claims as filed," he said. Under Wizengamot statute, he paused, and Harry had the impression that Dumbledore had been awake very late consulting exactly the right statutes. Article 14 of the founding provisions, a heritage claim filed with Gringotts authentication and signed under the ancient compact cannot be challenged through standard procedural objection. The claims are either valid or they are not. The authentication is either sufficient or it is not. He looked at Harry. "It is sufficient." Rufus Scrimgeour's expression had moved through 3 distinct stages in the last 30 seconds, settling somewhere between controlled fury and the professional respect of one strategist watching another make a good move. "Chief Warlock," he said carefully, "perhaps we should take a recess to review." "The provisions don't allow for recess delay," Harry said, pleasantly. Scrimgeour looked at him. Harry looked back. This was, Harry had come to understand recently, one of the things he was actually quite good at, the specific act of meeting a powerful person's gaze without any performance of deference. It was a skill he'd acquired the hard way and had stopped apologizing for. "The claims are being processed," Hopkirk said from the clerk's table, with the tone of someone who had decided that procedure was her friend and she was staying close to it. She was already marking the ledger. "For the record, the seat holder registering all 12 claims is Harry James Potter," Harry said. "Yes," she said, and wrote it down. The chamber, which had been building towards something, subsided into the particular noise of many people updating their understanding of the situation simultaneously. Harry walked up to the upper tier. 12 seats. Distributed in a rough arc across the highest level of the horseshoe, where the oldest house seats were. They had been covered for 16 years with a thin layer of proprietary Wizengamot fabric that turned out to be a dustcloth. Harry removed them, one by one, folding each one neatly and placing it on the aisle, and as he uncovered each seat the carvings on the back lit faintly, the sigils recognizing the bloodline they'd been waiting for. He sat in the Potter seat first. The chair settled around him in a way that had nothing to do with its physical dimensions and everything to do with the sensation of a lock finding its key. Then he moved to the next one. And the next. It took 4 minutes, moving efficiently along the upper tier. He sat in each seat for exactly long enough to let the recognition complete and then moved to the next, and by the time he reached the 12th, the Emery's seat, which was at the far end of the upper tier and which, when Harry sat in it, produced a flash of light faint enough to be deniable but visible enough that 3 members in the tier below exchanged looks, the chamber's ambient energy had changed noticeably. He walked back to the Potter seat and sat down. His permanent seat, for these purposes, the highest vote weight of the 12, the anchor. Across the chamber, he could feel the people doing the calculation. 12 seats. Vote weights attached to each. The old houses carried more than the new, each founding era seat was worth 3 standard votes, some of the truly ancient ones worth 5. The final number, which Hermione had calculated precisely and written down in red ink at the top of page 1 of her architecture document, was 47. The entire current Wisengamot had 217 votes. The Dark Sympathizer bloc, the Malfoy-aligned traditionalists, the families that had been covertly pro-Voldemort and had wriggled out of accountability after both defeats, controlled 63 votes. Dumbledore's loosely allied progressive bloc controlled 71. The middle, the genuinely uncommitted, the career politicians and the pragmatists, held 83. Harry's 47 went into that calculation and tilted the entire structure. Not enough to simply outvote everyone else on his own, but enough that nothing passed without his cooperation or over his explicit opposition. Enough that both blocs needed him more than they needed each other. He looked down at the chamber floor. A man named Thaddeus Knott, patriarch of the Knott family, third from the left in the traditionalist bloc, a man whose son was in Harry's year at Hogwarts and who was known to have escaped Azkaban after Voldemort's first fall by claiming Imperius, was watching Harry with an expression that Harry found interesting. Not the open hostility he'd expected. Something more careful. More assessing. Knott was doing the vote math too. Harry met his eyes, held them for 3 seconds, then looked away. He didn't need to say anything. The math said it. The session ran for 2.5 hours after that, and it was the most satisfying 2.5 hours Harry could remember spending in any formal setting. The first item on the agenda had been a proposed amendment to the Magical Beings Classification Act, a piece of legislation that had been quietly working its way through committee for 6 months, which would have reclassified werewolves, people like Remus Lupin, from Class 3 dangerous beings to Class 4, which would have made it illegal for them to hold employment in any capacity involving contact with minors, which in the wizarding world meant essentially all employment. It had been expected to pass. The Dark Sympathizer bloc was for it. Enough of the middle had been softened up with private meetings to get it over the line. Dumbledore had been 1 vote short of blocking it. Harry voted against it. That alone wouldn't have been enough, but his founding seat vote weights added 6 effective votes to Dumbledore's count rather than 1, and 2 middle block members who had been watching Harry carefully since he sat down updated their calculations in real time and voted against it too. The amendment failed by 11 votes. Thaddeus Knott's expression flickered. He was recalibrating. The second item was a proposed budget reallocation away from the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, specifically cutting the office that handled magical creature welfare protections. Harry voted against it. Failed. Third item, an oversight review into alleged irregularities at Azkaban since the Dementor defection. This had been Scrimgeour's agenda item, a genuine one. He wanted the review because he was actually concerned about security. Harry voted for it. Passed. He's building a record, Ron said from the gallery, in a low voice that nonetheless carried to Hermione's ear. He's voting on everything and he's making each vote legible. He's not just voting, Hermione said quietly, watching Harry's face as the fourth item was read. He's showing everyone in that chamber exactly what kind of power this is. Every vote is a message. What's the message? She watched Harry vote against a proposed restriction on Goblin banking autonomy, a small measure, almost a footnote, that would have required goblins to notify the Ministry within 72 hours of any inheritance audit. She watched Ragnarok, standing at the side of the room, register this vote with a very small inclination of his head. That he has no interest in being anyone's ally by default, she said. That his votes are going to be his own and they're going to be principled, and if you want them you're going to have to actually deserve them. That's going to make him enemies. He already has enemies. He's making the kind of enemies that respect you. The budget vote came out 14 against, after 2 more middle block members swung, and Scrimgeour accepted the defeat with the controlled equanimity of a man who understood he needed to talk to Harry Potter privately and soon. After the session, people came to Harry. This was not unexpected. What was unexpected was the order in which they came and the things they said. The first was a woman Harry didn't recognize, middle-aged, sharp-featured, in robes the deep green of someone who'd spent money on the color rather than the cut. She introduced herself as Councilwoman Andromeda Greengrass, no relation to the Greengrass family whose daughter was in Slytherin, she said. The name was a coincidence she had never entirely made peace with, and she represented 4 votes in the middle block and had a question. "The Slytherin seat," she said. "You're intending to use it?" "All 12, Harry said. The traditionalist families have always considered the Slytherin founding seat their natural inheritance. Symbolically, I mean. The actual line," she paused, "well, the actual line is clearly yours, but the symbol is also mine," Harry said, pleasantly but with enough clarity that it wasn't a conversation he was interested in continuing. "The seat represents a magical tradition I carry. I intend to use it as such." She studied him for a moment. "You're not going to make this easy for anyone, are you?" "I'm going to make it honest," Harry said. "Occasionally those are the same thing." She almost smiled. "4 votes," she said. "I'm interested in what you do with that Azkaban review." The second person was less welcome. Nott approached him in the corridor outside the chamber, having apparently decided that a private conversation was better than an overheard public one. He was tall, cold-faced, the kind of patrician wizard who wore his blood purity like armor and had spent so long in that armor he'd forgotten it was armor rather than skin. His son had Harry's astronomy textbook because Harry had thrown it at Draco Malfoy in their 5th year, which was not relevant but came to mind. "Potter," he said. "Not," Harry said. "That was a significant demonstration. I was filing claims and casting votes. Pretty standard Wizengamot business." The corner of Nott's mouth moved, not quite amusement, more the acknowledgement of a chess player who's watched someone make an unexpectedly good opening move. "Your vote weight is substantial." "It is. There are families in this chamber who have long memories and significant resources who might find common cause with your positions. If their positions are ones I can support," Harry said, "I'll support them. If they're not, I won't." He looked at Nott directly. "I'm not building a block. I'm voting my conscience. If your conscience happens to align with mine on a given measure, then we'll vote the same way. That's as far as it goes." Nott studied him. "Your father would have, my father's dead," Harry said, "no heat in it. I'm not him. Good afternoon, Nott." He walked away before Nott could respond. Scrimgeour found him in the atrium, which Harry suspected was not accidental. The minister would have known which exit he'd use, would have timed the approach. He had 2 Aurors with him that he dismissed with a gesture at a distance, coming the last 20 feet alone. Harry stopped walking and let him come. "Minister," Harry said. "Mr. Potter." Scrimgeour was assessing him in the direct way of someone who had spent a career reading people quickly. "That was quite an entrance." "I was invited," Harry said. "By a letter filed with the clerk's office 14 years before I was born, technically. I'd like to talk to you about the situation." "I imagine you would." Scrimgeour didn't react to the mild bluntness. "Points to him. The ministry has an interest in the stability of the Wizengamot structure." 47 votes appearing overnight, reappearing, Harry said. "They were always there. They just weren't being counted." "Reappearing," Scrimgeour allowed. "Creates a significant shift in the power structure that the ministry needs to understand. I want to be transparent with you, Potter. I need to know how those votes are going to be cast." "So does everyone else in that room," Harry said. "They'll learn by watching. I'm the Minister for Magic. I'm asking directly." "And I'm answering directly," Harry said, with the same pleasant tone he'd been using all day that was starting to feel like its own kind of weapon. "I vote my conscience on each issue. I don't make block deals. I don't trade votes for access. If the ministry puts forward legislation that's good for Magical Britain, all of Magical Britain, including the parts you don't usually think about, I'll vote for it. If it doesn't, I won't." He paused. I'd suggest the best strategy for getting my votes is to put forward good legislation. Scrimgeour looked at him for a long moment. You're 16. Yes, Harry agreed. Another long moment. Then something shifted in Scrimgeour's face, a movement from calculation towards something more like frank assessment. I'm going to be honest with you, Potter. The timing of this, the Wisengamot seats, all of it, with Voldemort active, the timing, Harry said, is not my choice. I found out about the 12 houses a week ago. I filed the claims the day after. He met Scrimgeour's eyes. But you should know, the Magister Primus compact has provisions that are relevant to the current war. I'm not going to use those provisions as ministry tools. But I am going to use them. He let that sit. I'm not an Auror, Minister. I'm not under your authority. I'm not working for you. I'm working for the same thing you're working for, which is a Britain where Voldemort is gone and the people responsible for enabling him are held accountable. A pause. All of the people responsible. Scrimgeour went very still at all. How much do you know? He said. Enough, Harry said. More every day. The Minister for Magic looked at him with the expression of a man recalibrating from the beginning. Then he offered his hand. Harry shook it. I'll want that conversation, Scrimgeour said. A proper one. Soon. When I'm ready, Harry said. I'll come to you. He walked out of the ministry into the London afternoon, through the phone box, and stood on the pavement for a moment feeling the July sun and the city noise and the 12 seals doing their quiet resonating thing. Ron and Hermione were waiting at the leaky cauldron with an enormous amount of food between them because Ron had been hungry since 11 and had made an executive decision. Harry dropped into the chair between them and immediately took half of Ron's sandwich, which was accepted without comment. How do you feel? Hermione said. Hungry. He ate for a minute. Good, he said then. Not happy exactly. Just. He thought about it. Like I did the right thing. You absolutely did, Hermione said. The werewolf amendment alone, Harry, Lupin's going to, don't tell him it was me, Harry said immediately. Ron and Hermione exchanged a glance. He'll know, Ron said. Probably. But don't, I didn't do it because I wanted him to know. I did it because it was right. He drank some of the butterbeer that had appeared in front of him at some point. What did you see from the gallery? The vote math looked the way you calculated it. Better, actually, Hermione said. 3 middle block members who I had marked as uncertain voted your way on the werewolf amendment without any visible pressure. I think seeing the founding seat votes, the weight of them, did something. It reminded people in that room about what those seats mean. Where they came from. She paused. There's a historical memory in that chamber, Harry. Most of those people know, on some level, that the wizarding world was built on the 12-house compact. Seeing those seats filled it's not just political. It's something older. Not tried to make an offer, Harry said. I figured. What kind? Vague. Vote trading. I said no. Good. She had her notebook out. I've been thinking about the next steps and I want to walk through them with you because the order matters. She flipped to a fresh page. The Wisengamot seats establish you as a political actor with real weight. That's important. But the compact's other provisions, the asset recovery, the house properties, the house magic traditions, those need to be addressed separately, and the house properties are where things get complicated. Because some of them are occupied, Harry said. Not just occupied. 3 of the 12 ancestral seats are in active use by parties who, based on Ragnarok's documentation, have been there under irregular or fraudulent title for decades. One of them, she tapped a specific page, has been in continuous occupation since 1814. Voss, Harry said. We think. The documentation isn't explicit, but the chain of title is broken in 1814, which which is the same year Dumbledore said Voss became active in Britain. Harry looked at Ron. One of my 12 ancestral houses has been Voss's base of operations for 200 years. Ron let out a slow breath. That's a bit much, isn't it? Which one? Harry said. Hermione flipped to the property documentation page. Thornmere, she said. The ancestral seat of House Cavendish, one of your 12 through the Potter line's secondary inheritance. It's in Cornwall. A large estate. According to the documentation, the Cavendish line was ended violently in 1814, the entire family killed in what was officially recorded as a magical accident. Which was not an accident, Harry said. The Goblins, Hermione said carefully, flagged it as a point of interest. The leaky cauldron was its usual midday self around them, busy, cheerful, smelling of pasties and spilled ale, entirely indifferent to the conversation happening at a corner table between 3 teenagers. Harry looked at Thornmere's entry in the satchel documentation. A sketch of the estate, copied from what looked like an extremely old Gringotts property record, a large stone manor on a cliff top, with extensive grounds and a particular architectural detail that the sketch labeled First Ward Tower, which according to the property notes was the original structure around which the estate had been built. Not a decorative tower. A warding structure. The seat of a house magic wardcraft tradition going back before the Norman conquest. Gryffindor's wardcraft, one of 12 traditions now accessible to a Magister Primus. Someone had been living inside Harry's wardcraft inheritance for 200 years. Harry closed the documentation. He picked up his butterbeer. He drank it. I need people, he said. Hermione looked up. What kind of people? Not soldiers. Not an army. He thought about it carefully. People who are good at specific things. The same way Dumbledore had his order, but, not secret. Not hidden. Something that can operate openly. He turned his butterbeer glass in his hands. I need someone who knows the political landscape inside out. I need someone who knows magical law. I need someone who knows the 14 kinds of dark magic I'm apparently going to need to deal with. I need someone who knows the international picture, the ICW, the European magical community. He paused. And I need someone Voss doesn't have any files on, because anyone with an established reputation in Wizarding Britain is either in Voss's records or vulnerable to him through someone who is. That's a very specific list, Ron said. Neville, Hermione said immediately. Both of them looked at her. He's been training since the Department of Mysteries and he's better than anyone knows. And, his family. The Longbottoms are one of the oldest wizarding families in Britain. His grandmother has contacts in the Wisingamot going back 40 years. And Voss's files, if they track influence and power, would have the Longbottoms marked as neutralized since 1981. She met Harry's eyes. Augusta Longbottom is not neutralized. That's a good call, Harry said. Who else? Luna, Ron said. Both of them looked at him. He shrugged. She knows things. She knows different things than anyone else knows and she doesn't care who that bothers. And her father runs the Quibbler. We're going to need a communication channel that isn't the Daily Prophet, Harry finished. Yes. Bill, Ron said. For the curse breaking and the dark magic side of things. He's at Gringotts full time, he knows Ragnarok, and he's dealt with more ancient magical structures than almost anyone in Britain. He paused. He's going to want to know about the ancestral houses. He's going to want to come to Cornwall, Harry said. Probably. Fine. Who am I missing? Hermione was making a list. She paused, quill in hand. There's one more I want to suggest, but I don't know how you'll feel about it. Harry waited. Draco Malfoy, she said. The word landed with some force. Ron made a noise that conveyed complex feelings efficiently. His father is in Azkaban, Hermione said, before Harry could respond. Voldemort is furious with the Malfoy family. Draco knows it. He's been the closest placed observer to the Death Eater operation for 6 years, and he is, I think, someone who is about to be given a very stark choice between surviving his loyalty to Voldemort and not surviving it. She looked at Harry directly. I'm not saying trust him. I'm saying he has intelligence we can use and a motivation to provide it, and right now nobody is giving him a door to walk through. He's had 6 years of calling Hermione mudblood, Ron said flatly. Yes, Hermione said. And I'd still rather have his intelligence than not. Harry looked at the table. He thought about Malfoy in the corridors of Hogwarts, the practiced sneer, the casual cruelty, the entitled certainty. Then he thought about Malfoy's face in moments the sneer had slipped, on the train in 2nd year when he'd heard his father's name in the context of the chamber, in 4th year when Voldemort had returned, in 5th year when the full implications of what his family's allegiance meant had begun to become concrete. Fear, not loyalty. Fear dressed up as loyalty, the way it often was. Not yet, Harry said. But I want him watched. Neville can do it, they've been in the same year for 6 years and Draco doesn't rate Neville, which means he's not careful around him. He paused. If Draco comes to us, it needs to be his own choice. We can't approach him yet. Hermione nodded, adding a note. Right, Harry said. I'll write to Neville tonight. And Luna. Ron, can you talk to Bill? He's coming home this weekend anyway, Ron said. Yeah. Good. Harry pushed back from the table. And I want to visit Thornmere. Harry, Hermione began. Not to take it back. Not yet. I want to see it first. I want to understand what we're dealing with before we move on it. He stood up. Ragnarok's documentation has the coordinates. Can we do a ward analysis without going inside the property line? Bill could, Ron said immediately. From outside, yes, he could map the ward structure without entering. Harry nodded. This weekend, then. They were back at the Burrow by 4. The afternoon was lazy and warm, the garden fragrant with whatever Molly grew in the back beds that Harry had never learned the name of. Arthur was at work. Fred and George were at their shop. Ginny was at the kitchen table with her charms homework when they came in, and she looked up at Harry with the direct attention she'd been deploying since his arrival that he had stopped pretending not to notice. How was the Wizengamot? She said. Productive, Harry said. Mum said you were going to file claims. Did it work? 12 seats, he said. Yeah. She studied him with the frank assessment that Ginny had always done and that Harry had always found slightly unnerving in the best way, not because it was unfriendly, but because it was accurate. You're not going to tell me the whole thing, she said. Later, he said. When there's more of it to tell. Fair, she said, and went back to her charms. Harry went upstairs. He sat on the narrow bed and wrote 3 letters. The first was to Neville, brief, personal, asking if they could meet before term started. Asking how he was. Meaning it. The second was to Luna, shorter, warmer, asking if her father might be interested in a conversation about wizarding political history for a future issue of the Quibbler. Luna would understand the subtext. Luna always understood subtexts, she just didn't always acknowledge them at the expected speed. The third was to Ragnarok. Short. 3 lines. Confirming that the activation was complete and the Wizengamot claims had been filed. Thanking him. Asking, at the end, a question that had been forming since the session that morning. The document says house magic traditions become accessible at the time of activation. I haven't consciously accessed any of them yet. What should I know about how that works? He sealed all 3 and sent them with 2 of the Weasley household owls, who seemed unbothered by their double duty. Ragnarok's reply arrived in the evening, before dinner, which meant either the Goblin had been expecting the question or Goblin post was faster than human post, which Harry suspected was true. Mr. Potter, the traditions do not announce themselves. They are not a course of study or a door to open. They are more like an instrument you have always carried but have not yet played. They will make themselves known when the situation requires them. Do not try to access them deliberately. They will come when they are needed. The wardcraft tradition in particular will respond to a genuine warding need. I would suggest that visiting an ancestral property, even from outside the boundary, will be sufficient to wake it. We would advise caution. We would also advise doing so soon. 3 of the 12 properties have had unusual activity in the past week. Someone is paying attention. Harry folded the note. He went downstairs. He ate dinner with the Weasleys and talked and laughed and helped Ginny argue Ron into doing the washing up. But Ragnarok's words sat behind his eyes, someone is paying attention. Of course they were. He'd filed 12 house claims in the Wisengamot in front of 200 witnesses and the chief of Gringotts. He'd voted down 3 pieces of legislation that the Dark Sympathizer bloc cared about. He'd shaken Scrimgeour's hand in public and walked out of the ministry looking like a person who knew exactly where he was going. Attention was the point. Attention meant that whoever was watching, Voss, Voldemort, the people Voss had placed in the ministry, the Dark Compact holders feeling the compulsion's first distant pressure, they were all updating their calculations. Let them. He'd spent 16 years being managed, contained, kept small enough to be useful and not so large as to be inconvenient. He was done with small. He thought about the ward tower in the sketch of Thornmere. The first ward tower, seat of Gryffindor's wardcraft tradition, occupied for 200 years by the most patient and dangerous man nobody had heard of. He thought about what it would feel like to walk up to that boundary and have the tradition wake up inside him for the first time. He thought about what Voss would feel when that happened. Good, he thought again, the same word he'd thought at the kitchen table a week ago with cold toast and a life-changing letter. It was becoming something of a theme. He finished the washing up. Chapter 4, The Man Who Wasn't a Myth. The letter arrived on Friday morning inside another letter. The outer envelope was addressed to Ragnarok at Gringotts, in handwriting that was architectural in its precision, every stroke intentional, the kind of penmanship that didn't come from school but from someone who'd had long enough to develop it into an art form. Ragnarok's accompanying note to Harry was 3 words, as expected. Be careful. The inner envelope was cream, unsealed, addressed simply to the Magister Primus in the same architectural hand. Inside was a single card, heavy stock, the kind of material that cost money in a way that didn't announce itself. I would enjoy meeting you. I think you would find it worthwhile. I will be at the Café Vindobona in Vienna on Sunday at 2 o'clock. I understand if you prefer a different venue, suggest one. I understand if you prefer to bring companions, bring them. I have no interest in a confrontation. I have a great deal of interest in a conversation. I am genuinely impressed by what you've accomplished in a week. I don't say that to flatter you. I say it because I think you're someone who can tell the difference. M.V. Harry read it twice. Then he showed it to Hermione and Ron and watched their faces. Ron read it and looked up immediately. It's a trap. It might be, Harry said. What kind? Ron blinked. He hadn't expected the question to be redirected. He thought about it. The kind where you go and he has people there and it turns into an ambush? He had 45 years to arrange an ambush and didn't, Harry said. He suppressed instead. That's his method. He looked at Hermione, who was reading the card for the 3rd time with the focused expression she wore when she was being honest with herself about something uncomfortable. He's not going to try to hurt you, she said slowly. That would be the opposite of everything we know about how he operates. He removes obstacles quietly. He doesn't, he'd see direct violence as wasteful. Inelegant. She put the card down. What he's going to do is try to reframe who he is and what he's done in a way that makes working with him seem reasonable. And you think we shouldn't go, Harry said. She met his eyes. I think we absolutely should go, and I think we need to go knowing exactly what he's going to try to do so we can take what's useful and not fall for the rest of it. She paused. I also think Vienna is a bad idea. Neutral ground means nothing if he chose it. So we name somewhere else, Harry said. Somewhere that means something to you. Where you have an advantage he doesn't. Harry thought about it. The Hog's Head, he said. Hermione and Ron both stared at him. Aberforth Dumbledore runs it, Harry said. He's Dumbledore's brother. He has no interest in Albus's politics, no interest in mine, no interest in anyone's except his own. His bar is warded to 17 different specifications and he doesn't care who knows it. And if Voss has been operating for 200 years building files on everyone with power or influence in Wizarding Britain, Aberforth is exactly the kind of person who wouldn't be in those files, Hermione said slowly. Because he spent his entire adult life being aggressively unimportant to everyone. Right, Harry said. I want Voss on ground that means something to me rather than him. He sent the reply through Ragnarok that afternoon. The Hog's Head, Hogsmeade, Sunday at 2. I'll be there. Bill Weasley arrived Saturday morning in a state of barely controlled excitement that he was clearly trying to moderate out of respect for the gravity of the situation and was not entirely succeeding. He was taller than Ron and broader, with the long hair and the dragonfang earring of someone who'd spent 7 years in Egypt doing things with curse-breaking that made ministry officials slightly nervous. He had a set of scars along the left side of his jaw from a greyback encounter 2 years ago, and he wore them with the complete indifference of someone who had genuinely stopped thinking about them. He sat at the Burrow kitchen table with Ragnarok's property documentation spread in front of him for 40 minutes, not speaking, occasionally making small sounds that might have been the professional cursebreaker's equivalent of a musician hearing a piece they hadn't encountered before. Thornmere, he said finally. Thornmere, Harry confirmed. I know this property. Not personally, from Gringotts records. It's been listed as uncontested private estate for as long as any of the human records go. He looked up. The Goblin records are different, obviously. How long has Ragnarok known? He said the flag started in 1981. The irregular title probably longer, Dumbledore thinks 1814 was when Voss took it. Bill let out a breath. The ward structure on this place, he said, tapping the property sketch, is going to be unlike anything currently active in Britain. 200 years of someone building on top of whatever original warding was there. Layering. And the original is, he looked at the documentation, First Ward Tower. Gryffindor's wardcraft tradition. He stared at Harry with frank assessment. You can feel the wards. Already? I can feel the 12 seals, Harry said. I don't know yet which tradition is which. You'll know when we get close to Thornmere. Bill said it with certainty. The wardcraft tradition is specifically territorial. It responds to the property line. When we get within half a mile, you're going to feel it like, he searched for the analogy, like finding a frequency. A broadcast you couldn't tune until now. And Voss's additions on top of the original wards. Those I'll deal with, Bill said, with the comfortable confidence of someone naming their area of expertise. Analytically first. We're not breaking anything this weekend. I want to map the full structure before we touch it. 2 centuries of intentional layering, you break the wrong piece and the whole thing collapses or reacts. Either way, bad day. He looked at Harry. When do we go? Sunday morning, early. Before the meeting with Voss. Bill nodded slowly. You're going to visit one of his properties and then sit down with him a few hours later. Yes. Bill looked at him with the expression Ron occasionally got, the Weasley expression that meant they were reassessing their understanding of someone they thought they already knew. Right, he said. I'll need my full kit. They left at 6 on Sunday, before anyone else in the Burrow was awake except Molly, who was at the stove with her wand before they reached the kitchen and had sandwiches and a flask of tea assembled with the efficient love of someone who had long since stopped asking where exactly her children were going and focused on making sure they went fed. Thank you, Mrs. Weasley, Harry said. She looked at him for a moment with the kind of look she'd been giving him since he'd arrived, the one that had a lot in it, the things she'd heard, the things she suspected, the things a woman who'd raised 7 children and buried a war's worth of grief could recognize in a 16-year-old's particular quality of steadiness. "Be careful," she said. It was the same thing Ragnarok had said. It felt different coming from her. They apparat to a cliff road in Cornwall that Bill knew from a previous professional survey, 2 miles east of the coordinates Ragnarok had given. The morning was grey and salt-smelling, the sea audible below the cliffs, the sky doing what Cornish skies did in July, threatening something that probably wouldn't happen but keeping its options open. Harry felt the wards after about 10 minutes of walking. Not the subtle hum of the seals he'd grown accustomed to over the past week. Something else, a directional pull, like compass north but in a direction that didn't correspond to geography. A frequency, like Bill had said. A broadcast. And underneath it, layered over it in the way Bill had described, something else, the press of deliberate construction, careful and cold and very, very old in a different way from the original. The original wards breathed. The additions on top of them didn't. They sat over the original the way a hand sits over a mouth. "Feel it?" Bill said. "Yes," Harry said. "What does the original feel like?" Harry thought about how to describe it. "Like something that recognizes me." Bill nodded, unsurprised. "That's Wardcraft responding to the bloodline. The first ward tower was keyed to the Gryffindor line. Anything built on it, even 2 centuries of Voss's work, can't erase that fundamental keying, because it's not in the construction. It's in the stone." He had a series of instruments out now, small copper and brass devices that he was directing toward the distant tree line where the edge of the Thornmere grounds must be. The overlay is sophisticated. 12 distinct layers, I'd say, built at intervals. He wasn't here full time, this was a project. He came back periodically and added to it. Like he was fortifying, Hermione said. She was standing slightly back, watching both the instruments and Harry's face with equal attention. "Or anticipating," Bill said. "Someone who knew this property had an heir who'd eventually come looking." He stopped. One of the instruments had gone very still. "Hello." "What?" "There's a layer here that's not warding," Bill said quietly, eyes on the device. "It's monitoring. Active monitoring, recent calibration, within the last week." He looked at Harry. "He knows you filed the claim." "Of course he does," Harry said. "He has a notification charm on the property. Tied to the Wisingamot records, probably." Bill put the device down and picked up a different one. "He knows you're coming here eventually. He's not here himself, I'd feel a presence that old, but he'll know you were here." "Good," Harry said. Bill looked at him. Ron looked at him. Hermione didn't, because she was already writing in her notebook. "You want him to know," Bill said. "I want him to sit down at the Hog's Head this afternoon," Harry said, "and know that I was outside his property this morning. That I can feel the original wards responding to me. That when I come back, and I am coming back, it won't be from outside the property line." He looked at the tree line, at the distant grey shape of the roof of Thornmere barely visible above it. "I want him to come to that meeting knowing exactly what he's dealing with." Bill was quiet for a moment. Then he went back to his instruments. "Give me an hour," he said. "I want the full structural map." They were in the Hog's Head by 1:30. Aberforth Dumbledore had been informed, via a note from Harry delivered through Albus, that Harry would be using the back room for a meeting that afternoon. The note had come back with 2 words, "Fine. Cash." The back room was small and smelled of goat and old wood and the specific variety of stubborn independence that Aberforth had clearly been cultivating for decades. There were 4 chairs and a table scarred with enough rings from glasses and mugs to qualify as its own kind of record. The walls were stone. There were no windows. The door was heavy. Aberforth himself opened the front bar at noon as usual, served his regulars with the indifference of a man doing a job he'd chosen specifically because it asked nothing of him emotionally, and when Harry's group came in at 1:30, gave them the back room key without comment and went back to polishing a glass that didn't need polishing. Harry sat facing the door. Ron sat to his right. Hermione sat to his left. Bill had gone back to the burrow. His job this morning had been the map, not the meeting, and his presence would overcrowd the message Harry wanted to send. The message was, 2 friends. No army. No anxiety. At exactly 2 o'clock the door to the back room opened. Malachar Voss was not what Harry had expected. He'd formed a picture, over the past week, something monumental, visibly ancient, bearing the weight of 2 centuries like weather. What walked through the door was a man who appeared to be in his early 50s, medium height, silver-haired in a way that could have been natural or chosen, dressed in traveling robes of a quality that wasn't flashy. He moved like someone who had spent a very long time moving through spaces where he was not meant to be noticed. Not sneaking, something more refined than that. Simply inhabiting the room at a volume slightly below what the room expected. He had brown eyes, which was somehow the most surprising thing. Harry had expected cold. He got warm, attentive, the eyes of a man who was genuinely curious about the person across from him. He looked at Harry, took in the room in a single unhurried scan, and sat down in the chair across the table. "The Hog's Head," he said. His voice was even, accented in a way that suggested several languages had been native and he'd been balancing between them for so long they'd averaged out. Aberforth Dumbledore's establishment. Thoroughly unrecorded in any file I've ever maintained. He almost smiled. That was intentional. "Yes," Harry said. "Smart." He said it the way he'd written, genuinely impressed, without performance. Just acknowledgement, peer-to-peer. He looked at Harry for a moment with the frank attention of someone who had spent 200 years reading people and was now reading one who was harder to categorize than most. "You went to Thornmere this morning." "I did." "You'll have felt the original wards." "I did." "The wardcraft tradition is speaking to you." "Not a question." "It is," Harry said. Voss was quiet for a moment. "Then you already know you can take it back," he said. Not with resignation, exactly, more with the tone of a man who has done his calculations and is naming the result. "The property is yours by right of blood and compact. The monitoring I have in place will tell me when you cross the boundary. At that point the original warding will respond to your presence, and whatever I've built on top of it over 200 years will," he paused, "complicate things, let's say. Not for you. For the process." "I know," Harry said. "Bill Weasley mapped the layers this morning." Voss looked at him steadily. "You brought Bill Weasley to Cornwall?" "Not here." "Of course." He folded his hands on the table. For a man who had just learned that his 2-century-long project was being dismantled from the outside, he was extraordinarily composed. "I want to explain something to you," he said. "Not to excuse myself. Because I think you're someone who deserves accurate information about the situation." "Go ahead," Harry said. "I've known about the Magister Primus compact for longer than Albus Dumbledore has been alive," Voss said. "I first encountered it in 1763, when I was attempting to understand why certain attempts to consolidate the European magical financial infrastructure kept running into structural resistance." He paused. "The compact is not a document someone wrote. You know this already. It describes something in the nature of magic itself, a structural fact. The 12 houses are the 12 pillars. When they converge, the convergence point has authority over the entire structure. That authority is not political in origin. It's magical. It's fundamental. And you spent 200 years trying to prevent the convergence," Harry said. "I spent 200 years," Voss said carefully, "trying to prevent the convergence in a bloodline I was not certain could be trusted with what it implied." The room was very still. "That's a significant thing to say," Harry said. "Yes." He didn't soften it. The Magister Primus Compact gives the Convergence Heir authority over 12 institutions that together constitute the entire organizational structure of wizarding civilization. Education, law, defense, healing, trade, knowledge, warding, binding, transformation, divination, elemental communion, and the keeping of the deep magic. He looked at Harry directly. Do you understand what it means for one person to have that authority? Tell me what you think it means, Harry said. It means the difference between a civilization and a fiefdom, Voss said quietly. It has happened before. Not with 12 houses, never the full convergence, but with smaller versions. 3 or 4 houses converging, the heir becoming aware, taking their authority and using it as authority is always eventually used. Private benefit. Consolidation. The slow crush of anything that might challenge the central power. He paused. I have watched that happen 3 times in 200 years. I arranged the prevention of what would have been a 4th. So you took it on yourself, Harry said. To decide who was trustworthy enough. Yes, Voss said. I did. I have spent 2 centuries making decisions that no one person should make, and I have made them because the alternative was leaving them to people who were worse qualified. He said it without apparent irony, without self-congratulation. Just a statement of fact about choices made over a very long time. I am not asking you to approve of what I've done. I am trying to give you the context. The 1814 Cavendish family, Harry said. A pause. The first real one. Yes. You killed them. I arranged their deaths, Voss said. The Cavendish heir at that time was in negotiation with a dark compact holder who had proposed using the wardcraft tradition to build a continental dark ward structure that would have. He stopped. There are things I could tell you about what that ward structure would have done that would make the action seem more justified. I'm not going to, because you'd be right to note that I'm framing it and I've been doing this long enough to know that justification and truth are not the same thing. A pause. I killed 6 people in 1814 because I judged it necessary. It was the worst decision I've ever made that I still believe was correct. I have those. Harry looked at him. And my parents? No, Voss said, immediately and without any qualification. Absolutely not. Their deaths were Voldemort's doing and Pettigrew's betrayal. I had no hand in that. I had a hand in the weeks afterward, the asset redirections, but not in their deaths. I want that to be completely clear. Why should I believe you? You shouldn't, simply because I've said it, Voss said. You should verify it independently. Ragnarok has access to records that will corroborate the timeline. Dumbledore can confirm what he knows of the sequence. I'm telling you because it's true, not because I expect you to take my word for it. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Not testing him exactly, more taking the measure of something. He believed him on this point. He wasn't sure why. Something about the quality of the statement, the absence of the slight overclarity that people gave to lies they'd prepared. Voss was a man who had spent 2 centuries being careful about everything, and that carefulness was present in every word he'd said, but this one landed differently. What do you want from this meeting? Harry said. Voss looked at him. I want to understand what kind of Magister Primus you're going to be. Why? Because if you're the kind who wants the authority because it's authority, the kind I've prevented before, then I'm going to continue to be a problem for you, and I want you to know that clearly and in advance. He paused. And if you're not that kind, if you're something I haven't encountered before, then I want to know that too. Because the situation we're both in would be significantly different in that case. What situation is that? Harry said. Voldemort, Voss said simply. He is a genuine threat to the structural stability of magical civilization in a way that none of his predecessors have been. The Horcruxes, the compelled loyalty, the particular ideology, he paused, he is not something I can manage through my usual methods. He cannot be reasoned with. He has no institutional interests I can leverage. He is, in the most precise sense, a structural problem. He met Harry's eyes. And the Magister Primus compact is the single most powerful legal and magical tool that exists for dealing with him. You want my help, Harry said. I want to stop being in opposition to yours, Voss said. That's different. Hermione spoke for the first time. Her voice was measured and very controlled. The asset redirections. The financial theft from Harry's inheritance that has been ongoing since 1981. The deliberate suppression of his knowledge of his own bloodline. The occupation of Thornmere. She looked at Voss steadily. Before any conversation about cooperation can happen, those things have to be addressed. Voss looked at her with what appeared to be genuine respect. You're Hermione Granger, he said. You've been building the legal architecture for the Wisengamot claims. Yes, she said. Your people in the ministry, at minimum 2, we believe, though probably more. We need their names. I can provide those, Voss said. The redirected assets, a full accounting and restitution to the vaults. Technically complex but achievable. Ragnarok's office has the mechanisms. I can facilitate. Thornmere, she said. I will vacate the property, Voss said. With one request. Name it, Harry said. The ward analysis I've built there over 2 centuries, the documentation, the research, the records. There is a library inside Thornmere that contains 200 years of the most comprehensive research into ancient magical structures that exists anywhere in the world. I would like to be allowed to remove that library before you take possession. Silence. No, Harry said. Voss looked at him. You stay out of the property from today, Harry said. Everything inside Thornmere is part of the estate and therefore mine by compact. Including the library. He paused. You're welcome to have access to it. Supervised, specific research purposes, arranged through Ragnarok. But the library stays. Voss was quiet for a long moment. It was the most visible he'd made his thinking process, the careful calculation visible in the set of his shoulders, the slight adjustment of something around his eyes. Agreed, he said. Ron, who had been silent throughout, said, the other Dark Lords. The 3 besides Voldemort. Voss looked at him. Excuse me. Ragnarok's documentation listed 4 active Dark Compact holders. Voldemort and 3 others. Ron's tone was even. If the Compact's compulsion is hitting all 4 of them, who are the other 3 and what are they going to do about it? Voss looked at Ron Weasley with the expression of a man updating a file in real time. You're smarter than your family's reputation suggests, he said, not unkindly. Everyone always thinks that, Ron said. The other 3. One is in Eastern Europe, Bulgarian, operating under a name you'd know but an identity you don't. He is old, cautious, and will likely comply with the acknowledgement requirement without confrontation. He has enough institutional interests to protect that open conflict with a Magister Primus would cost him more than acknowledgement. He paused. The second is in Britain. Someone you know, operating in plain sight under an identity that has been established for years. I will give you that name because not knowing it is an active danger to you. And the third? Harry said. The third, Voss said slowly, is the one I've been afraid of since 1891. She is the reason I found the compact in the first place. Her name is Seraphine Aldrich. She is French, she is very old, and she has been building a dark compact structure specifically designed to counter the Magister Primus ever since she realized the convergence was possible. He looked at Harry with the first expression that wasn't entirely controlled, something colder, more direct. Voldemort is dangerous because he wants to destroy. Aldrich is dangerous because she wants to replace. She has been watching you since the Gringotts audit. She has assets in Britain. And unlike Voldemort, she does not need to be compelled to acknowledge you, because acknowledging you directly makes you her most important target. The room was very quiet. The compact's compulsion doesn't work on her the way it works on Voldemort. Hermione said. Her dark compact is older than Voldemort's and structured differently, it includes specific countermeasures against primacy acknowledgement that she designed after finding references to the Magister Primus in the 1800s. Voss looked at Harry. She is the reason I am sitting in this room offering you cooperation rather than continuing to resist you. Because Aldrich becoming the dominant power in European magic is worse than any Magister Primus I've encountered, and stopping her requires you. Harry sat back. He looked at the scarred table. He thought about everything Voss had said, all of it, the whole shape of it. 200 years of one man's judgment deciding the fate of bloodlines. 6 people dead in 1814. 45 years of Harry's life deliberately impoverished and constrained. And now the same man sitting across a table in the back room of a goat-smelling pub explaining, with considerable intelligence and no apparent shame, that the situation had changed and he was prepared to adjust. The worst part, Harry thought, was that Voss wasn't wrong about much. The Cavendish heir in 1814 aside, and Harry wasn't ready to let that go, just parking it, Voss's read of the situation, of the dangers, of the structural problems, was accurate. Possibly the most accurate accounting he'd gotten from anyone who wasn't Ragnarok. That was the trap Hermione had named. The offer that sounded reasonable because it was, partially, reasonable. Here's what's going to happen, Harry said. He said it in the tone he'd been developing over the past week, the tone that wasn't cold and wasn't warm, that existed in the register of someone who has made up their mind and is communicating a decision rather than proposing one. You're going to give us the names. All of them, your ministry contacts, the 3 dark compact holders, everything about Aldrich you have. You're going to facilitate the asset restitution with Ragnarok and you're going to vacate Thornmere immediately. Not today, not tomorrow. Before I finish this sentence. Voss looked at him. You've had the property for 200 years, Harry said. You've had your research. You've had the library. You've had the wardcraft tradition being suppressed inside your walls instead of accessible to the person it belongs to. That's done. He paused. In exchange, and this is not a negotiation, this is what I'm offering because I think it's right, not because you've earned it, I will not pursue you for the 1814 deaths. Not because they were justified. Because pursuing it now costs more than it returns and I'm not interested in historical justice as a performance. He let that settle. What I am interested in is Aldrich. So you'll give us everything you have on her. And you'll consult, not lead, not make decisions, not operate independently, when we need specific knowledge about the European magical structure. As an asset, Voss said. As a consultant, Harry said. There's a difference. Assets are used. Consultants are listened to and then the decision-maker decides. Another long pause. Voss looked at him with an expression that had moved into territory Harry couldn't quite read, something that might have been the face a very old, very patient man made when he encountered something genuinely new. You're nothing like what I expected, Voss said. Good, Harry said. Do we have an agreement? Voss extended his hand. Harry looked at it. Then he looked at Hermione, who gave him the slight nod that meant she'd been watching for any indication of a binding charm or curse on the handshake and hadn't found one. He looked at Ron, who shrugged in a way that meant your call. Harry shook the hand. The moment it ended, Voss reached into his robes and produced a folded document. He placed it on the table. The ministry names, he said. And everything I have on Aldrich that I carry with me. The rest, the full file, I'll deliver to Ragnarok by Tuesday. The British Dark Compact holder, Harry said. The one in plain sight. The name. Voss told them. Ron's chair scraped back half an inch. Hermione's quill stopped moving. Harry didn't react outwardly, but something in his chest did. Not surprise, exactly. More the specific sensation of a piece snapping into place in a structure you'd been building blindly, the sudden understanding that several things you'd noticed but not connected had been connected all along. How long? Harry said. 7 years that I'm certain of, Voss said. Possibly longer. And there, Harry stopped. The compulsion. They've been feeling it since the activation. Yes. They've been managing it. They're very controlled. But they can't manage it indefinitely and they know it. Voss looked at Harry steadily. You have limited time before they act on it, one way or another. Harry nodded. He stood up. One more thing, Voss said. Harry waited. Albus Dumbledore asked me, in 1969, after Fleamont Potter came to him, to stop the asset redirections. He said it quietly. I told him no. I told him the convergence was too dangerous and Fleamont's grandson, when he existed, would not be ready for what it implied. He paused. I was wrong about the second part. I don't often say that. I know, Harry said. He didn't mean I know you don't often say that. He meant I know you were wrong. Something about that landed in Voss's expression in a way that was complicated and real and not something Harry was in the mood to spend time on. He picked up the document. He walked out of the back room, through Aberforth's bar, and into the Hogsmeade afternoon. He sat on a wall outside the post office. Ron and Hermione came out behind him. Hermione sat beside him. Ron sat on the wall's other side with his legs dangling. The name Voss gave us, Ron said, after a bit. Yeah, Harry said. Are you going to tell me it can't be right? No, Harry said. Because it's right. I just need a minute. The Hogsmeade afternoon was quiet, the village doing its off-season thing where it became a place people actually lived rather than a destination. Someone's cat was crossing the road near the Three Broomsticks. The sky had cleared since Cornwall this morning. Quirinus Quirrell was a dark compact holder and Dumbledore didn't know, Hermione said quietly. Not until it was almost too late. This is worse than Quirrell, Harry said. I know. This person has been in a position to watch everything. To adjust. To every decision I've made in the last week. They don't know what we know, Ron said. They know what they've seen. They don't know about Voss. They don't know what's in that document. He looked at Harry. And they don't know we know about them. Not yet, Harry said. He looked at the document in his hands. 2 ministry names he didn't recognize, officials in mid-level positions, the kind of institutional furniture that made decisions no one watched because no one watched mid-level ministry officials. He'd give those to Scrimgeour. Aldrich. Everything Voss had. He'd give that to Dumbledore, who'd been afraid of her since 1947 and deserved the full picture. And the name. The British Dark Compact holder in plain sight, who had been managing the compulsion for 3 days and was running out of time to keep managing it. That one Harry needed to handle himself. Tomorrow, he said. Are you going to confront them? Hermione said. No, Harry said. I'm going to give them a choice. Same as I gave Voss. He folded the document and put it in his pocket. Everyone gets one chance to choose right. And if they don't? Harry looked at the clear Hogsmeade sky, at the familiar rooflines, at the Three Broomsticks where he'd had 100 ordinary afternoons that had been less ordinary than he'd thought. Then we stop being gentle about it, he said. He got off the wall. He dusted off his robes. He started walking back toward the path to the apparition point, and Hermione and Ron fell in on either side of him, which was its own kind of answer to every question about what he was walking into. The 12 Seals hummed. The Wardcraft tradition was louder now than it had been this morning, Thornmere's recognition still resonating in him, the first Ward Tower's frequency finding its way into his awareness and settling there like a note struck and left to decay naturally, which would take a very long time. Somewhere in a Cornish manor, Voss's monitoring charms were deactivating. The 200-year occupation was ending not with fire and confrontation but with a handshake in a pub that smelled like goats. That was fine. The confrontation was coming. Just not with Voss. Chapter 5, Blood and Old Stone. They went to Thornmere on Monday. The decision was made at breakfast, between Ron's third piece of toast and Hermione's second cup of tea, with the kind of quiet efficiency that came from three people who had been thinking about the same thing since yesterday and had simply been waiting for someone to say it out loud. "Today," Harry said. "Today," Hermione agreed, without looking up from her notes. "I'll get Bill," Ron said, and pushed back from the table. Molly stood at the stove and said nothing, which was its own kind of permission. They were on the Cornish Cliff Road by 9, the morning sharper than Sundays, a clear sky with an edge to it, the sea doing something dramatic 300 feet below, the salt smell so thick you could taste it. Bill had his full kit, a leather roll of instruments and tools that he wore across his back like a musician's case. Neville had arrived at 7 that morning on a night bus. Harry's letter had reached him Thursday, and Neville had written back in an hour and arrived in 3 days, which said everything about where Neville Longbottom currently was relative to the boy who'd accidentally melted cauldrons in first year. He'd grown 4 inches since 5th year and had the quality of someone who had spent a year of grief turning inward and coming out the other side of it knowing what he was made of. He'd brought his own wand, a replacement, new, better suited, and he'd brought a book on ancient British magical architecture that he'd checked out of the Longbottom family library and had clearly been reading since Harry's letter arrived. "The First Ward Tower," Neville said, walking beside Harry on the cliff road, the Thornmere tree line visible now ahead of them. "It's in 3 different texts I could find. The Gryffindor wardcraft tradition is," he paused, finding the right words, "it's not just about building walls. The original texts describe it as living architecture. Wards that adapt. Wards that think, basically. Wards that think," Harry said. "Responsive to intent rather than instruction. Most modern warding is instruction-based, you set parameters, the ward enforces them. This is older. The ward reads the situation and acts accordingly." He looked at Harry. "Which means when Voss built on top of it, the original layer would have been, watching," Harry said. "Watching." "Yes. Waiting for the bloodline to come back." Bill, slightly ahead of them, raised one hand without turning around. They stopped. The tree line was 50 feet away. The Thornmere grounds were behind it, and even from here, even through the trees, Harry could feel the boundary. Not like a wall. More like a surface tension. A soap bubble edge where 2 different kinds of space met. "The outer monitoring is gone," Bill said, his instruments confirming what Voss's agreement had implied. "He cleared it last night or this morning. But the layering underneath," he turned around. His expression was the professional one, the one that had seen Egyptian curse traps and Gringotts deep vault security and had a working vocabulary for danger that most people never needed. 12 layers, like I said Sunday. The original at the base, then 11 additions. The recent ones, last 50 years or so, are relatively straightforward. The older ones are nastier." "Nasty how?" Ron said. "The 1814 layer is designed to injure anyone who crosses it without specific authorization. The authorization was keyed to Voss's magical signature and nobody else's." He looked at Harry. "Except, and this is interesting, the keying has a conditional. If the Gryffindor bloodline activates the Magister Primus compact," he checked his notes from Sunday, "the authorization automatically transfers. It's in the original warding logic. He built on top of it but he couldn't change the conditions. He literally couldn't, the original is too deep and too fundamental to be edited from the outside." "So I can cross," Harry said. "You can cross. The rest of us," Bill made a balanced gesture with his hand. "With you present, the original ward will probably extend some form of welcome recognition to your companions. Probably. Ancient wards are conservative about this and occasionally the definition of companion is narrower than you'd hope. So we might get hurt," Ron said. "You might get stung," Bill said. "I've dealt with worse and so has Neville." He looked at Harry. "Your call. I can spend another 2 days mapping the full structure and working out safer crossing protocols, but I want you to understand that Voss knew we were here Sunday and he has had 48 hours to make different arrangements if he chose to. I don't think he did, I think the agreement holds, but every day we wait is a day the property isn't yours yet. Today, Harry said. Same word as breakfast. Same certainty. Bill nodded. He rolled up the instrument kit and recalibrated two of the devices he kept out in his hands. Stay close to Harry. Don't touch anything inside the grounds until I've looked at it. If something feels wrong, say so immediately and don't push through it. He looked at Neville specifically. That means you too. I know you've read the books. Neville accepted this with good grace. They walked to the tree lean. The crossing was not what Harry expected. He stepped through the boundary first, and the sensation was not the soap bubble pop he'd anticipated but something considerably more comprehensive. The 12 seals blazed, all of them at once, not painfully but intensely, like the difference between a candle and a bonfire made of the same flame. The wardcraft tradition, which had been broadcasting since Sunday morning, suddenly resolved. Like a sound becoming a word. Like noise becoming music. He stopped walking. The others came through behind him. He heard Ron make a sharp sound, something between pain and surprise, and Neville say I'm fine in a slightly too quick way that meant it had been closer to pain than he was admitting. Bill came through last and immediately had his instruments up, scanning without commentary. Harry wasn't scanning. Harry was standing in the Thornmere grounds just past the tree lean and feeling the property. Not metaphorically. The wardcraft tradition gave him the grounds the way a map gives you terrain, not visually, but structurally, a full-dimensional sense of every ward layer, every anchoring point, every deliberate construction and every original structure. 11 additions, brittle now in the way of things that have lost their authorization, already beginning to loosen. And underneath them, deep and clean and breathing, the original. Living architecture. Neville had been right. The first ward tower was 300 meters ahead through the grounds, visible now through the trees as a grey stone structure that was older than the manor house built around it. The manor was 17th century, the tower was pre-conquest, the stones of it quarried from the cliff top itself. And it was aware. Not conscious in any human sense, but aware in the way that very old, very well-made things were aware, responsive to presence, reading intention the way Neville had described, and it had been reading Harry's intention since he crossed the boundary. It liked what it found. Harry walked toward it without discussion. The others followed. The grounds were overgrown in a way that suggested Voss hadn't cared about appearances, or had cared about privacy more than aesthetics. The formal gardens that the old property records showed had gone to wildness decades ago, the hedges become trees, the stone paths buried under a generation of growth. It would have been beautiful under different circumstances. It was still beautiful, actually, the particular beauty of a place that has been allowed to follow its own inclinations. Halfway across the grounds, something moved in the hedgerow to their left. Bill's hand went up. Everyone stopped. A figure stepped out of the shadows between two overgrown yew trees. Robes, dark, the hood up. One hand visible, wand empty, raised in a gesture of non-aggression. The other hand stayed inside the robe. Show both hands, Harry said. Conversationally. The second hand came out. Empty. The figure reached up and pulled back the hood. Draco Malfoy looked considerably worse than he had at the end of term. The particular polished coldness he'd maintained since first year was gone, or not gone but cracked, the surface of it, in the way that expensive porcelain cracks under stress but doesn't shatter. He was thinner. He had the quality that Harry had seen in the mirror of a erased version of himself once, the look of someone who'd been too long without sleep and too long with thoughts they couldn't escape. Ron said something under his breath that wasn't polite. Malfoy, Harry said. Potter. Draco's voice was even, which looked like it cost him. He looked at Harry with the expression Harry had noted at the Wisengamot session in imagination, not the sneer, not the performance. The thing underneath it. I need to talk to you. You're on my property, Harry said. I know. A beat. I've been here 2 days. He stopped. Restarted. I didn't know where else to go. I knew the property had been, I knew it was connected to you. I thought if I waited, you've been sleeping in the grounds for 2 days, Ron said, with an expression that said he was going to have feelings about this later. Roughly. You could have just written me a letter, Harry said. I wasn't sure it would reach you. I wasn't sure it wouldn't reach, he stopped again. The second stop was more telling than the first. He looked at the tree lean behind him, the habitual check of someone who had been watching their back for long enough that it had become involuntary. There are people watching my mail. There have been since June. Harry looked at him for a moment. The compulsion, Voss had said. The British Dark Compact holder managing it, controlled but running out of time. Draco Malfoy didn't carry a Dark Compact, he was too young, hadn't taken whatever oath his father had taken. But if his father's compact was inherited through blood in some form, if being born into the Malfoy line while Lucius was a Death Eater created some secondary obligation, are you feeling something you can't explain? Harry said. A pressure. Something in your magic. Draco stared at him. How did you, secondary compact resonance, Hermione said, very quietly. She was looking at Draco with the focused assessment she used when she was filing things away quickly. Not a full compact, his father's binding is casting a shadow through the blood connection. He'd feel the compulsion at lower intensity but more confusingly, because he doesn't know what it is. Draco looked at her. He visibly swallowed the instinct toward the habitual mudblood, and what replaced it was something rawer. I don't understand what's happening to me. I've had, since last week, there's something wrong with my magic. Not wrong like broken. Wrong like, something pulling at it that I can't identify and can't stop, and I can't ask anyone because everyone I could ask is either in Azkaban or serving someone who would. He stopped. I don't know who else to come to. The grounds were quiet. The birds had been singing the whole time and Harry had barely noticed. Through the trees the grey stone of the first ward tower stood patient and very old. Come with us, Harry said. The door of the first ward tower was iron, older than the manor around it, the surface of it carved with the same patterns Harry had recognized from the Gringotts chamber, the old symbols his eyes had kept sliding off. They didn't slide now. With the wardcraft tradition fully awake in him, he could read them the way he could read English, not consciously translating, just understanding, the way language worked when it was truly native. Ward and welcome. Keep and release. The blood knows the stone and the stone knows the blood. He put his hand on the door. It opened. Not with a click or a creak, with the sensation of something that had been holding itself very still for a very long time releasing a breath. The door swung inward smooth and silent, and the room beyond was circular, stone-walled, lit by light that had no visible source but was warm and steady and seemed to come from the walls themselves. In the center of the room was something that took Harry a moment to identify. Not a pedestal, not a throne. A ward stone, a block of the same cliff stone as the tower, roughly cubic, waist height, with the surface worn to a dull smoothness by centuries of handling. And carved into the top surface, deep and clear and unmistakably recent relative to the rest of the room, V, property of MV, authorized access only. Voss had branded it. Like a deed. Like a territorial mark. The wardcraft tradition in Harry's chest went very quiet for a moment and then did something that he could only describe as objecting. A clear, clean pulse of refusal, the original warding recognizing a claim that was not legitimate and presenting that information in the only way it knew how. Harry put both hands on the ward stone. The carved letters flared white-hot and were gone. Not burned, removed, the way ink could be removed from parchment, as if the stone's surface had simply elected not to hold that particular inscription. In its place, rising from the stone itself, was a different inscription. Same depth. Same clarity. HJP, Magister Primus, Thornmere restored. The room breathed. The walls brightened. Somewhere above them, in the tower structure, something mechanical and ancient moved, the sound of stone counterweights and iron mechanisms that had been dormant for 2 centuries beginning, slowly, to resume their function. Oh, Neville said softly. He was reading the walls, the inscriptions there, with the expression of someone who had been studying this tradition in books and was now standing in the primary source. "Oh, this is, later," Bill said, with the fond firmness of someone managing an enthusiast. He was scanning the room with his instruments, his focus sharp. "The ward layers are destabilizing. Voss's additions, now that the ward stone has transferred, they're losing their anchor points." He looked at Harry. "They need to come down. If they collapse uncontrolled, the energy discharge could." "Tell me what to do," Harry said. "You're going to pull them," Bill said. "I'm going to guide the sequence, oldest first, working outward. Neville, I need you on the eastern anchor point, there." He pointed to a spot on the wall, ready to absorb any backflow. Neville moved immediately. "Ron, the door stays open, any discharge goes out and up, not in." Ron planted himself at the door with his wand out and the expression of someone who was very good at the specific task of holding a position. "Draco," Harry said. Draco had been standing slightly back, watching all of this with the look of someone for whom the world's operating assumptions had been revised several times in the last 10 minutes. "What? Can you cast a basic containment barrier?" A flicker of something, not pride, more the reflex of someone reminding themselves of what they could do. "Yes. North wall. Bill will tell you when." Draco moved to the north wall without arguing, which in its own way said more about where he currently was than anything he'd said outside. "Ready?" Bill said. "Ready," Harry said. He put his hands on the ward stone and reached into the 12 seals, into the wardcraft tradition specifically, and asked it the question that wasn't a question, not "how do I do this" but "do this with me." The tradition answered. "Not with instructions. With participation." The way a very experienced partner on a dance floor didn't explain the steps but simply moved and expected you to move with them and trusted you would. He pulled the first layer. It came apart like tension releasing, like the moment a knotted rope finally gives. The energy of it rushed outward. Neville's hands came up on the eastern wall and he pulled the backflow into a containment pattern, his face set with concentration. Ron kept the door open. Bill called the next anchor point. Second layer. Third. The older ones were more resistant. The 1814 layer fought, genuinely, the intent built into it still active after 2 centuries, and Harry felt it push back against the wardcraft tradition, and for a moment it was a genuine contest of wills between what Voss had built and what Gryffindor's bloodline had been holding in trust for 900 years. There was no question which was older. The 1814 layer came down. Draco's containment barrier caught the discharge from it, a hard crack of energy against the stone that made the north wall hiss and left a scorch mark that would have been considerably worse without the barrier. Draco held it without breaking, which Harry noted. 4. 5. 6. Each one cleaner than the last, the sequence building momentum now, the original wards rising through the dismantlement like something surfacing from deep water, stronger, cleaner, fundamentally different in quality from everything that had been stacked on top of them. Living architecture. The tower breathed with each layer that came down. The walls brightened incrementally. Bill was calling anchors and timing, and Harry was moving through them with the wardcraft tradition like a second voice in his head that knew this work the way a musician knew their instrument, not intellectually but physically, in the hands, in the chest, in the automatic competence of inherited mastery that had been waiting 16 years to be used. 7. 8. On 9, something went wrong. Not wrong in the sense of failure, wrong in the sense of discovery. The 9th layer was not a ward. It was a vault. A concealment structure, not designed to protect the grounds but to hide something inside the tower itself, built into the northwest quadrant of the circular room's foundation. And when Harry's pull began to take it apart, the concealment failed before the vault structure did, revealing what was inside. A space the size of a large wardrobe, cut into the foundation stones, sealed with the 9th layer's energy. Inside, shelves. The beginning of the library Voss had asked to take. "Stop," Harry said. Bill stopped calling. The tower went quiet. Harry walked to the northwest quadrant. He looked at the revealed shelves. Not books, not all of them. Some were books, the old vellum-bound kind that predated printing. But most were records. Ledgers. Correspondence. 2 centuries of a careful man's documentation, organized with the thoroughness of someone who understood that records were power. Hermione, Harry said. She was already there. She looked at the shelves. Her expression cycled through several things quickly and settled on a focused calm. I need a week, she said. You can have it, Harry said. Can you catalog it without moving anything? I can do a preliminary index with a documentation charm that will create copies we can work from while the originals stay here. She was already reaching for her wand. Harry, if these are what I think they are, I know what they are, Harry said. Do the index. Everything stays until we know what we have. He went back to the wardstone. He looked at Bill. Last 3, he said. Bill picked up the sequence. 10, 11, and the original surface layer, not a ward at all in the Voss sense but the original keying, the Gryffindor Bloodlines instruction to the tower about who was family and who was not, and when Harry cleared it the tower understood who was standing in its center and the light in the walls went from warm to incandescent for 3 seconds before settling to something steady and permanent and deeply, thoroughly right. The tower was awake. Harry stood at the wardstone with his hand still flat on its surface and breathed. The Thornmere grounds were his now. Fully, magically, in every sense the compact and the ancient warding could make binding. The 12 seals had shifted, the wardcraft tradition had moved from broadcast to resident, had settled into him in a different way, not just a frequency he was receiving but something that had clicked into operational mode. He could feel the grounds the way he'd felt them when he crossed the boundary, but better, not a map now, more like proprioception. The grounds as an extension of himself. 143 acres of Cornish clifftop, 2 centuries of Voss's careful occupation, 9 centuries of something much older. His. The trouble came from outside. Bill said, ward intrusion, east boundary, and it was the tone he used for something real, not theoretical, and every wand in the room was out before the sentence was finished. 3 of them. Coming fast through the eastern edge of the grounds, not at the boundary but already inside it, which meant they'd been inside before the new warding activated and had simply been waiting. Voss had cleared the monitoring charm. He had not necessarily cleared his people. Secondary agents, Hermione said, reading it quickly. Left behind when he withdrew. They might not know about the agreement. Or they do and they're acting anyway, Ron said. Either way, Harry said, and moved to the tower door. The grounds between the tower and the eastern tree line were the overgrown formal gardens, hedges become walls, stone paths buried, plenty of cover in every direction. The 3 figures were moving through it with the competence of people who knew the layout, which meant they'd been here before, which meant they were Voss's people in the operational rather than philosophical sense. Harry stepped out of the tower into the summer morning. He felt them through the grounds the way he felt his own feet, precise location, movement pattern, intent readable through the living architecture. Not mind reading. More like the way you knew your own house in the dark. They were coming with wands drawn and bad intentions and they had not yet updated their information about who was currently holding the ward structure. He raised one hand. The grounds between them and him responded. Not a wall, living architecture didn't build walls the way conventional warding did. It built obstacles, responsive and specific, the kind that understood the situation and acted accordingly. The hedges to the east thickened. The buried stone path rose from the earth in a stretch that spanned 30 feet and became a barrier that wasn't there a moment ago and would not be easy to cross. Undergrowth tightened around the ankles of all 3 intruders simultaneously. They stopped. One of them cast a severing charm at the undergrowth and it parted for half a second before growing back. Living architecture. Leave the grounds, Harry said, loud enough to carry. Now. Voss agreed to vacate this property. You're on the wrong side of that agreement. One of the 3, the central one, taller than the others, raised their wand in Harry's direction. Harry dropped flat and rolled left behind the corner of the tower's foundation as a blasting curse hit the stone where he'd been standing. The impact was significant. Chunks of old mortar went sideways. Harry came up on one knee and sent 2 stunners back, both of them aimed not at bodies but at wand hands, the compact careful target work that had become second nature after a year of Dumbledore's army. One of the 3 went down. The other 2 split, using the garden's overgrown cover well, and Harry felt them moving through the grounds in his awareness, one circling left toward the manor house, one coming straight forward through the gap the first had left. The one going straight was fast and had already cleared the stone path barrier by the simple expedient of transfiguring himself a route through it, which was competent and worth noting. Bill came out of the tower and placed himself at Harry's left. "Don't kill anyone," Harry said. "Wasn't planning to," Bill said. "That would be a significant amount of paperwork." The fast one came around a dead formal hedge and into the open space in front of the tower and cast 3 spells in sequence so quickly they overlapped. Harry blocked the first with a shield charm, felt the second graze his left shoulder with enough force to knock him half a step sideways, and returned the third one to sender with a redirecting charm that sent the leg locker back along its own trajectory. The fast one went down in a heap, both legs locked, wand rolled free. The third, circling left toward the manor, had been heading for, Harry tracked through the ground sense, the library vault. The revealed shelves. Either they'd known about it and Voss had sent them specifically for the library, or they'd felt the concealment structure fall and drawn an accurate conclusion. "Hermione," Harry called. On it, she called back from inside, which meant she'd anticipated this and the documentation charm copies were already complete and the originals had been secured somehow, and Harry made a mental note never to question Hermione's pace of working. Ron came out of the tower doorway at a run, heading left along the manor's exterior wall, and Harry heard the cast and response of a short, sharp duel happening around the corner, then Ron's voice saying, "Stupefy," with the particular emphasis of someone who'd been patient long enough. Then nothing. The grounds were still. Harry stood in the summer morning outside the first ward tower of Thornmere, his left shoulder aching where the second spell had hit, 3 unconscious individuals on the grounds around him, 2 centuries of dormant warding fully active and fully his, and the 12 seals doing something he could only describe as satisfied. He rolled his shoulder. It hurt but it worked. Draco came out of the tower with his wand still up, looking around. He'd held the north wall the entire time without being asked to shift and without moving from his position. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. "Good work with the containment," Harry said. Draco blinked. He clearly hadn't expected that particular sentence. He put his wand down to his side and said, "Thanks," in a voice that sounded like someone using a word carefully for the first time in a while. They bound the 3, Voss's people, no identification on any of them, professional in the complete sense, and Harry sent a Patronus to Scrimgeour's office at the ministry with a brief, factual message about trespassing intruders at Thornmere requiring collection. His Patronus, the stag, still, though it moved differently now, more deliberate, carried the message into the morning sky and Harry watched it go with the particular private feeling of someone who had always associated that shape with his father and was learning a new relationship with that association. Ron was sitting against the tower wall with a cut along his forearm from a deflected cutting curse and an expression of deep offense. "I'm fine," he said, before anyone asked. "You're bleeding," Neville said. "I've bled before," Ron said. "It's fine. Does anyone have a—" Hermione had a Dittany bottle out and was already kneeling beside him, and Ron allowed it with the grace of someone who understood that resisting Hermione when she had Dittany was not a battle worth fighting. Harry sat on the wardstone step outside the tower door and let the ground sense settle. The 3 unconscious intruders were anchored to the earth by the living architecture, not cruelly, just held, the way the grounds had tightened around their ankles. They couldn't wake and run. They'd be there when the ministry arrived. Draco sat down at a careful distance from the group. He looked like someone who understood they were on probation and was trying to be quiet about it. Then he looked at Harry. "The pressure," he said. "The thing in my magic. You knew what it was. Secondary compact resonance, Harry said. Your father's Death Eater oath cast a shadow through your blood connection. You're feeling the compulsion my inheritance triggered. He looked at Draco steadily. It'll fade once your father formally acknowledges my status. He's in Azkaban and the compulsion will force it eventually whether he chooses to or not. But it's going to keep pressing on you until it happens. Draco was quiet for a moment. And when it does? When it does, the shadow lifts. You'll feel it go. Harry paused. What you do after that is your own business. You know what Draco started. I know what you've been, Harry said. And I know you've been in a house with Voldemort for the last 2 months and you came here instead of going back. He said it plainly. That's the thing I'm working with right now. Draco looked at him with something fractured and real in his face. Not gratitude, something more complicated. The expression of someone who'd spent 6 years in a role he'd been handed before he was old enough to understand what he was accepting and had only recently begun calculating the actual cost. I have information, Draco said. About his movements. His plans. Things he stopped. I've been inside those meetings. I know things. I know, Harry said. Hermione's been thinking about this since before we left Britain. Draco looked at Hermione, who was still bandaging Ron's arm with the focused precision she brought to everything medical. She suggested we watch for you, Harry said. She said you'd come when you were ready. Draco looked at Hermione Granger with an expression that had no precedent in his relationship with her and spent a moment finding what to do with that. Then he looked back at Harry. What do I do? He said. Not what do you want from me. Not what's in it for me. Just, what do I do? Talk to Hermione, Harry said. Tell her everything you know. All of it. She'll know what's useful and what isn't. He paused. And for the record, if you ever call her mudblood again, in any context, for any reason, we're done. Clear. Clear, Draco said, immediately and without hedging. Ron looked up from his arm. His expression had moved from its earlier position towards something more complex, not forgiveness, not yet, but the acknowledgement that things were more complicated than binary positions allowed. He said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. The library was extraordinary. Hermione's preliminary index, run in 40 minutes while the 3 intruders were being bound, covered 11 shelves of records and 12 shelves of books. Among the records, correspondence between Voss and at least 40 individuals across 2 centuries, in 7 languages, covering every significant political development in European magical history that Harry had ever read about and several he hadn't. Property deeds for 17 different magical estates across 6 countries. Financial records in such detail that Hermione made a sound when she found the ledger that connected the asset redirections to a specific named account at a specific French magical bank. Among the books, 3 that Harry recognized as being on the restricted section list at Hogwarts, 5 that he recognized as being on the outright banned list at the Ministry, and 4 that Hermione identified, with increasing excitement, as texts that modern scholarship believed had been entirely lost. Including a copy of the original Magister Primus compact in pre-translation Old Gobbledygook, with marginalia in 4 different hands added over what looked like several centuries of consultation. This is, Hermione held it with the care of someone handling something both precious and dangerous. This is the original commentary. This is scholars adding to the understanding of the compact over hundreds of years. This is, she looked at Harry with the expression she'd worn outside Gringotts a week ago, the look of pieces aligning. Voss had the single best reference library for the Magister Primus in existence and he built it to understand what he was trying to suppress. Useful, Harry said. Incredibly useful, she agreed. The marginalia alone, when we're back, Harry said. Everything gets transported to, he stopped. He thought about where. Not the burrow, too personal, too exposed. Not Gringotts, Ragnarok had done more than enough already. Not Hogwarts, not yet. Here, Neville said. Everyone looked at him. "This is one of your ancestral properties," Neville said. "It has a ward structure that is now, according to what just happened, more responsive and more powerful than anything currently active in Britain. The library belongs here. And," he paused, choosing his words, "you're going to need somewhere that's yours. Not Hogwarts. Not borrowed space. Somewhere that answers to you." He gestured at the tower, at the grounds, at the ancient stone and the clear morning sky above the cliff top. "This is the obvious answer." The others looked at Harry. He looked at the tower. At the grounds, overgrown and old and breathing with the ward awareness that was now his own extended sense. At the sea beyond the cliff, the grey Cornish Atlantic going out to the horizon. "We'd need to," he started. "I can have the grounds functional in a week," Bill said. "The manor's structurally sound, it's just been empty. I'll want to do a full sweep for any remaining Voss installations, but the ward structure will help, it'll flag anything that doesn't belong." "The library stays in the tower," Harry said. "The manor can be made livable." "Not yet, we're going back to Hogwarts in September." "But after," he paused. After was a large word. After Voldemort. After Aldrich. After whatever came next and next and next. "After," he said, "this is where we'll work from." It felt right in the way that things felt right when they were both correct and real, not the theoretical rightness of a good plan but the physical rightness of standing in a place that recognized you. The Ministry collection team arrived at 2, led by an aura named Proudfoot who had the professional composure of someone who had received some very strange calls in his career and had learned not to visibly react to them. He looked at the 3 bound intruders. He looked at the tower. He looked at Harry. "Trespassing and assault," Harry said. "I'd also suggest questioning them about their employer, but that's your business." Proudfoot looked at him for a moment. "You're 16, he said. "I know," Harry said. Proudfoot made a sound that conveyed significant internal revision and began organizing his team. They were back at the burrow by evening, tired in the good physical way of people who had done actual work, with cuts and bruises distributed variously among them and Draco Malfoy sitting in the kitchen with the uncomfortable quality of someone who had not been in a normal house for a significant amount of time and was finding the normality itself somewhat destabilizing. Molly had, somehow and without visible adjustment, set an extra place at the table. She put a plate in front of Draco with the same calm efficiency she applied to everyone, met his expression of total confusion with a look that said she had raised 7 children and was not impressed by dramatic situations, and went back to the stove. Ron watched this. He watched Draco look at the plate. He watched Draco's expression cycle through several things in quick succession before arriving at something that looked, under all the years of practiced insufferability, very much like a child who hadn't been looked after properly in quite some time. Ron looked away. At his own plate. He picked up his fork. "Pass the potatoes," he said, in the general direction of the table, which included Draco. Draco passed the potatoes. That was the moment, Harry thought later. Not a grand gesture. Not a speech or a confrontation or a definitive statement. Just potatoes, passed across a table in a kitchen full of people who were tired and hungry and had spent the day doing something that mattered. He ate his dinner. The 12 seals were quiet, the Wardcraft tradition resident and steady in the back of his awareness like a banked fire that was very far from going out. Thornmere breathed on the Cornish cliff top 300 miles away, ward structures humming in the evening, the first ward tower lit from within by the same sourceless light that had been dormant for 2 centuries. The library waited. 900 years of Wardcraft tradition waited. 5 of the 12 ancestral properties were still unvisited, still unreclaimed, still sitting in whatever state years of neglect or occupation had left them. The name Voss had given him, the British Dark Compact holder, watching and managing and running out of time to manage, was going to need to be handled in the morning. That conversation, Harry thought, was not going to be easy. But then, none of the right things had been. He reached for the bread. Someone handed it to him before he could ask. He looked up. It was Draco, who immediately looked at his own plate with the studied indifference of someone pretending they hadn't just done something that cost them. Harry took the bread. Said nothing. Some things were better left as facts. Chapter 6, the Magister's reckoning. The name Voss had given them was Horus Slughorn. Harry had known it was coming, had felt the shape of it from the moment Voss said plain sight, someone you know, controlled, 7 years certain, and still, sitting with it the morning after Thornmere, it had the specific weight of a truth that rearranged everything around it. 7 years. Every Felix Felicis, every memory, every carefully cultivated connection, every dinner party, every gentle word about his mother's eyes. Slughorn collecting talented students the way other people collected art, and underneath that, underneath the warm amber glow of the comfortable professor who liked a good bottle of wine and a comfortable chair, a dark compact that had been pressing against Harry's seals for 10 days and that Slughorn had been managing with the extraordinary self-control of a man who had spent 50 years being precisely what he appeared to be. Not evil. That was the part that sat wrong. Voss hadn't been evil either, not exactly, and Slughorn's compact, based on what Voss's documentation described, was not the raw ambition of a Voldemort or the patient dominion of a Voss. It was older, stranger, something called a collector's compact that predated its holder's birth, that Slughorn had inherited through a family line Harry had never heard of, that bound him to the accumulation and preservation of magical talent. He genuinely loves his students, Voss had written, in the careful clinical language of his files. The compact does not manufacture sentiment. It channels existing character. Slughorn collects because he is genuinely moved by exceptional magic. The compact simply ensures that collection serves a secondary purpose, a preservation network, a web of powerful individuals whose magical signatures have been recorded and can, under specific dark compact conditions, be drawn upon. Not possession. Not control. Something more like, a silent lien on the people he'd gathered over 50 years. A claim he'd never intended to call in, Harry thought, that had been placed by something older than his own choice. The question was what Slughorn was going to do about it now. Harry went alone. Hermione had objected to this with the structured efficiency of someone who had 3 reasons prepared before Harry finished his sentence. Ron had objected with the blunter effectiveness of someone who said that's a terrible idea and waited for a better argument. Harry had listened to both of them and then said, I know, and gone anyway, because some conversations only happened right when they happened one-to-one, without the weight of witnesses. Slughorn was staying in a cottage outside Budleigh Babberton. He'd been between teaching posts, the old excuse, though Harry understood better now what that actually meant, and Harry apparat to the road outside at 8:30 in the morning with his wand in his pocket and the 12 seals steady and the address from Dumbledore, who had provided it with an expression that said he understood what Harry was going to do and had the grace not to comment on the wisdom of it. The cottage was the kind of place Slughorn naturally gravitated toward, comfortable, private, well-provisioned, the kind of solid English countryside house that said nothing dramatic about its inhabitant while providing every physical amenity. The curtains were drawn. There was a faint smell of good tobacco and something baking. Harry knocked. A long pause. Then the particular quality of stillness that meant someone was on the other side of the door deciding something. The door opened. Slughorn was in a dressing gown that was still better quality than most people's formal wear, and he looked terrible. Not the theatrical terrible of someone performing distress, the specific grey exhaustion of a man who had not slept properly in 10 days and had been spending that time in a losing battle with something he couldn't put down and couldn't explain. His eyes when they found Harry were complicated in a way that had nothing to do with surprise. He'd known Harry would come. Had probably known since the activation. Had been waiting with the particular dread of someone who understood exactly what was coming and had no good answer for any of it. My boy, he said. He said it the way he always said it, warm, genuine, the affection that Voss had been right about being real. And under it, 10 days of compulsion, and under that, something much older and much more complicated. Can I come in? Harry said. Slughorn stepped back. The cottage interior was Slughorn in miniature, overstuffed with comfortable furniture, walls hung with photographs of former students, a sideboard crowded with bottles and crystal glasses and the small accumulated tokens of a long collecting life. Harry sat in the chair Slughorn indicated and looked at the photographs while Slughorn made tea with the mechanical care of a man who needed something to do with his hands. Lily Potter was in 3 of them. Young, laughing, the red hair Harry had seen only in pensive memories. In one of the photographs she was with another student Harry didn't recognize, both of them in their Hogwarts robes, and Lily was doing something with her wand that left a trail of light in the air that the photograph preserved as a permanent arc. Slughorn put the tea down between them. He sat across from Harry. He looked at his own hands for a moment. "You know," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "How much?" "Voss gave me your file." A pause. Voss. The word landed in Slughorn's expression with complicated velocity. "He gave you up." "He gave me everyone," Harry said. "He's trying to cooperate with what's happening rather than fight it." He looked at Slughorn steadily. "The question I have for you isn't about the compact. I understand the compact. The question is what you've done with it." Slughorn looked at the tea he wasn't drinking. "The Collector's Compact," he said slowly, "came to me through my grandmother's line. I was 17 when it activated. I had no idea it existed before that." He paused. "You understand what it does? It records. It connects. Every student I've ever taken under my wing, for want of a better phrase, their magical signature is in the network. Filed. Accessible. Accessible to who?" Harry said. "To the compact's initiating structure," Slughorn said. "Which predates me by 400 years. It was built by someone I've never been able to fully identify, a collector in the original sense, someone who believed that exceptional magical talent should be preserved, catalogued, protected." He looked up. "The intent was benign, Harry. I have spent 50 years telling myself that." "And the draw-on condition," Harry said. Slughorn went very still. "You know about that. Voss's file. Under specific dark compact conditions, the signatures in the network can be drawn upon." "What does that mean, exactly?" A very long pause. Slughorn set down his teacup with the careful precision of someone managing the tremor in their hands. "Power drain," he said quietly. "Not total. Not lethal. But the compact structure, under crisis conditions, could use the connections to pull small amounts of magical energy from every person in the network simultaneously. A fraction from each, multiplied across." He stopped. "I have over 300 individuals in the network, Harry. Living former students across 60 years of teaching. And under a dark compact crisis condition," Harry said, "those 300 people would feel a drain on their magic and have no idea why." "Yes. Has it ever been used?" "Not in my lifetime. Not that I'm aware of." He met Harry's eyes with the combination of shame and earnestness that Harry had always found Slughorn's most genuine expression. "I have never activated it. I have never allowed it to activate. I have spent 50 years being very careful to never be in a situation where a crisis condition might trigger it involuntarily. By staying out of conflict," Harry said. "By staying out of everything," Slughorn said. "Retirement cycles. Careful positioning. Never the first choice for any post that might bring me into contact with active dark magic." He paused. "You understand now why I was so reluctant to return to Hogwarts. And why Dumbledore knew you were the only one who could give me the full riddle memory," Harry said. "Because you were already connected to both ends of the Voldemort problem. You taught him. You taught Lily." He thought about this. Dumbledore knew about the compact. He suspected. For years. He never asked directly. Something that might have been dry humor crossed Slughorn's face briefly. "Albus specializes in not asking the questions whose answers would require action." Harry almost smiled. "The compulsion," Harry said. "The acknowledgement pressure. You've been managing it for 10 days. Yes. You can't manage it indefinitely. No, Slughorn agreed. Another week, perhaps. Perhaps less. He looked at Harry with the frank attention of a man who had stopped performing. You've come to give me a choice. The same one you've given Voss, I imagine. Different circumstances, Harry said. Voss made active choices. Built things. Hurt people. What you have is inherited and you haven't used it the way it was designed to be used. He paused. But it's still a dark compact. It still represents a potential threat to 300 people who have no idea their magical signatures are in a network. I know, Slughorn said quietly. So here's what I need from you, Harry said. The compact needs to be dissolved. Not acknowledged and maintained, dissolved. Ragnarok's office has a process for dark compact dissolution when the holder consents. It won't be pleasant. It'll take time. But it ends the network, releases the signatures, and the draw-on condition becomes permanently unavailable. Slughorn was very still. In exchange, Harry said, I want two things. First, your full list of everyone in the network, every name, every signature. Not because I want to use them. Because they deserve to know it existed. He paused. And second. Voldemort. He watched Slughorn's face. The full memory. Not the edited version. The real one, every detail, everything he said when he asked you about Horcruxes. You know why I need it. Slughorn looked at him for a long moment. The morning light through the curtains caught the photograph of Lily on the wall behind Harry's head, the arc of light her 17-year-old wand had left still glowing in the image. She was the most naturally gifted student I ever taught, Slughorn said. He wasn't answering Harry's question. He was doing something adjacent to it. Not in terms of raw power. In terms of, the quality of it. The way she understood magic at a level most wizards never reach. Not as a tool. As a language. Something alive. He looked at Harry. You have that. Not the same way, yours is different, broader, it's been shaped by what you've been through. But the quality is the same. A pause. She would have, he stopped. Harry waited. She would have done exactly what you're doing, Slughorn said. Come here alone. Given me a choice. Not threatened, not performed, just, he made a gesture that encompassed the whole conversation, the straightforwardness of it. She would have sat in that chair and looked at me with those green eyes and I would have felt, as I do now, that lying was both impossible and beneath the occasion. He reached into the pocket of his dressing gown. He produced a small glass vial, the kind used for pensive memories, silver stoppered. He set it on the table between them. The full memory, he said. Unedited. Everything. Harry looked at it. He didn't pick it up yet. The dissolution, he said. Yes, Slughorn said. I'll contact Ragnarok this morning. A long exhale. There will be a period of significant discomfort. 50 years of compact bond doesn't release painlessly. I know, Harry said. I'll ask Ragnarok to assign someone experienced. You don't have to, I know I don't have to, Harry said. He picked up the memory vial and put it in his pocket. Will you come back to Hogwarts this year? Slughorn looked at him with something unguarded in his face. You want me to? You're a good teacher, Harry said simply. You've spent 50 years being careful not to be caught. Once the compact is dissolved, you don't have to be careful anymore. He stood up. Come back. Teach. Stop hiding. He paused at the door. The network list. I need it before the end of the month. You'll have it in a week, Slughorn said. Harry nodded. He opened the door. The morning outside was bright and ordinary. Harry, Slughorn said. He stopped. She'd have been proud of you, Slughorn said. Whatever you may have heard to the contrary. Whatever anyone has implied about who you should have been or what you should have done, she would have been proud of you as you are. Harry stood in the doorway for a moment. Thank you, he said. He meant it completely. He also moved on from it quickly, because Slughorn was right that his mother would have, and sitting with that feeling in a borrowed cottage doorway wasn't where he was going to do it justice. He apparat back to the burrow. 3 days later Harry convened the summit. That was Hermione's word for it. Harry had called it the meeting and Ron had called it the thing where we lock all the dangerous people in a room together, which was the most accurate description, and Draco, who had been sleeping in the Weasley attic and going through Voldemort's operational knowledge with Hermione in sessions that Harry could hear from 2 floors away, called it nothing but had a particular expression whenever it came up that said he was paying very close attention to how it was going to work. The venue was Thornmere. Bill had spent 3 days making the manor livable, not comfortable in the Slughorn sense, just functional. Clear floors, working fireplaces, the ward structure providing light and ambient temperature in the way that living architecture managed when it was fully operational. The Voss library was still in the tower, Hermione having made 4 full sets of document copies that were now distributed between Thornmere, the Burrow, and Gringotts. The invitation list was specific and had been argued over extensively. Dumbledore, invited. He was the chief warlock and Harry needed him present for the legal formalities. Scrimgeour, invited. He was the minister and Harry had promised him a proper conversation. This qualified. Ragnarok, invited. He had been part of this from the beginning and deserved to see it through. Augusta Longbottom, invited on Hermione's strong recommendation. She was Wizengamot Oldguard, had contacts in every corner of Wizarding Britain, and was, Neville had said with the quiet pride of someone whose family member had exceeded all expectation, absolutely terrifying when she decides to be. Neville himself. Luna, who had arrived 2 days earlier with a bag full of her father's archive material and an expression of serene focus that Harry had come to understand meant she'd been thinking about this for longer than anyone had told her to. Bill and Fleur, who had come from Shell Cottage and whose combined skill set, curse-breaking and defensive transfiguration, Harry had been quietly building a specific plan around. And one more. Remus Lupin arrived at Thornmere via Portkey at 9 in the morning and stood in the manor's main hall looking at the restored ward work with the expression of a man for whom several years of context had just reorganized itself. He looked at Harry. He had heard about the Wizengamot session. He had heard, through order channels, about the Werewolf Amendment vote. He was doing the thing he always did when he felt something strongly, going very still and finding the words carefully. You voted against it, he said. It was wrong, Harry said. You didn't, Lupin stopped. Tried again. I didn't ask you to. I know, Harry said. That's not why I did it. Lupin looked at him for a long moment with those quiet grey eyes that had always been the most precise instrument for reading Harry that any of his professors had deployed. Then he pulled Harry into a brief, firm hug, the kind of hug that expressed something complicated and then released it, which was exactly the right kind. Tell me what you need, he said. Sit with me at the head table, Harry said. And if Scrimgeour tries to make this a ministry briefing rather than what it actually is, say something. I can do that, Lupin said. They were all assembled in Thornmere's largest room by 11, the old hall, high-ceilinged, stone-floored, with the first ward tower's light finding its way through the high windows in shafts that made the room feel older than it was. For long tables arranged in a square, no head position in the architectural sense, though the seat Harry took established one de facto. Scrimgeour arrived with 2 aides who Harry quietly asked to wait outside. Scrimgeour, after a moment of calculation, accepted this. He sat across from Ragnarok and spent a professional moment adjusting to the experience of being in a formal meeting with a goblin. Dumbledore came through the flue in the corner and sat beside Augusta Longbottom, who gave him a look that suggested they had a history Harry was going to want to understand eventually. She was exactly what Neville had said, a small woman of considerable age who occupied space with the authority of someone who had decided decades ago that she was not going to take anything from anyone and had been consistent about it ever since. Luna sat beside Neville and had a notebook open and was writing things Harry couldn't see the relevance of but had learned to trust were relevant. Fleur sat beside Bill with the particular quality of someone who was in a room slightly below her operational level but was being gracious about it. Bill had 3 of his analytical instruments on the table in front of him. Draco sat at the far end, beside Hermione, which was an arrangement that would have been unimaginable 2 weeks ago and now simply was. He had a folder of handwritten notes that he'd compiled over 3 days of debriefing sessions and he held it with the careful grip of someone who understood that what they were holding was their own value to the room and was taking that seriously. Ron sat on Harry's right. Harry looked around the table. "I'm going to tell you everything," he said. "Not a summary, not a briefing. Everything we know. And then we're going to decide together what happens next." He let that sit. Decide together. I mean that. I'm not calling this meeting to tell you what I've already chosen. The compact gives me authority I intend to use, but authority used well is informed by people who know things I don't. Scrimgeour's expression shifted, not softened, but recalibrated. This was not the speech he'd expected. "Then let's start," Scrimgeour said. Harry started. He talked for 40 minutes. The Gringotts audit, the 12 houses, the compact, the asset redirections. Voss, his history, his methods, the Cavendish family, Thornmere. Slughorn and the Collector's Compact and the network of 300 magical signatures. Aldrich, and when Harry said her name Dumbledore went very still in the way that meant something significant. The Wisengamot session, what it had established, what it had changed. Thornmere and the Wardcraft activation. The 3 intruders, now in ministry custody providing, according to Proudfoot's follow-up, very little information because they knew very little. Voss had kept his operational structure properly compartmentalized. And then, last, the thing Harry had been building toward since Voss's list. There are 4 active dark compact holders in Britain, Harry said. 3 of them are this room's problem. The 4th, he paused, is Voldemort. And Voldemort's situation is different from the others because the compact's compulsion on him is categorical. He has no version of what Voss did, no version of what Slughorn did, no path to dissolution or voluntary compliance that he can live with. His entire identity is built on the belief that he is beyond any authority. He looked at the table. The compulsion is going to keep pressing on him until he breaks it or it takes him. He knows this. He's been trying to find a loophole for 10 days. There is no loophole, Ragnarok said. The statement had the finality of a goblin who had checked. I know, Harry said. And he's going to know it too, once he's exhausted the search. Which means at some point in the near future, Voldemort is going to act. Not because it's his optimal strategy, because the compulsion is going to make inaction cost more than action. He paused. He's going to come here. The room was quiet. Here, Scrimgeour said. Thornmere. I filed 12 house claims in the Wisengamot 2 weeks ago. I've reclaimed and activated the most significant of the 12 ancestral properties. I've been visible and deliberate about all of it. He knows exactly where I am and what I'm doing. Harry looked around the room. He's going to come here because the compact's logic demands a confrontation and because he is not, whatever he is, not someone who bends without breaking. He'd rather break. You've been engineering this, Augusta Longbottom said. It wasn't an accusation. More a confirmation, offered by a woman who recognized the pattern. I've been making sure it happens on ground I've chosen, Harry said. Rather than waiting for him to pick the moment. Dumbledore looked at Harry with the expression of someone watching a student who has moved past the material into territory the teacher hasn't prepared. The Horcruxes, Hermione said. She had been waiting for her part of the briefing, the way she'd been organized about everything in the last 2 weeks, letting Harry establish the frame and then filling it with the architecture. Voldemort's survival mechanism and the reason he can't simply be fought and defeated conventionally. She placed the memory vial on the table. This is Slughorn's full memory. Unedited. It contains the complete account of his conversation with Riddle about Horcruxes, including specifics about number and method that the partial version omitted. Dumbledore looked at the vial. We have reason to believe we can identify the location of at least 3 of the Horcruxes through the information in this memory combined with what Draco has provided about Voldemort's current movements, Hermione continued. She looked at Draco, who picked up his folder. Draco Malfoy speaking at a table that included Dumbledore, Scrimgeour, and Augusta Longbottom. 2 weeks ago this would have been unimaginable in a different way than it was now. Now it was just the next thing. He opened his folder, and he talked, and he was specific and clear and occasionally paused to find the right word, and when he was done the room had 3 Horcrux locations, a Voldemort operational timeline, and the confirmation that Nagini was the last Horcrux created and was always with Voldemort and therefore the hardest one. The ones we can reach before confrontation, Harry said. We reach them first. Bill. Bill spread his curse-breaking assessment across the table. 3 locations, a cave, a vault, a forest in Albania that Draco had named from something overheard 6 months ago. 3 different security structures. 3 different timelines for breach. The cave is the most dangerous, Bill said. The vault is Gringotts, which raises questions I'd like to address with Ragnarok directly. Ragnarok inclined his head. The Albania location is the most straightforward once we establish exactly where in the forest, which Draco is going to help with. I can be more specific, Draco said. I need to go back through what I remember about the exact, after the meeting, Hermione said. I have the map. Draco nodded and closed his folder. Aldrich, Harry said. Dumbledore spoke for the first time in an hour. I have been afraid of Seraphine Aldrich since I was 36 years old, he said, in the careful tone of a man being more honest than was comfortable. I encountered evidence of her work in 1947 during my investigation of Grindelwald and I concluded 2 things. First, that she was considerably more sophisticated than Grindelwald in every respect. Second, that confronting her directly would be precisely what she wanted. She has spent 2 centuries building a response to exactly that approach. He looked at Harry. The Compact's failure to compel her, the specific anti-primacy countermeasures Voss described, that is my primary concern. Why? Scrimgeour said. Because it means, Harry said, that while Voldemort is going to be driven toward confrontation by the compulsion, Aldrich is going to remain free to calculate. She watches Voldemort's conflict with me and she waits. He paused. She's the second problem. Not the first one we solve. You want to let Voldemort's confrontation happen first, Augusta said. Not because it's safe, Harry said. Because the Compact's coercive mechanism is the primary tool for dealing with him and I need to let it work. Once it's resolved, once Voldemort has acknowledged or been destroyed, the magical landscape shifts. The Compact's authority becomes established rather than theoretical. And that changes what I can bring to bear on Aldrich. He looked at Dumbledore. Including tools from the Thornmere Library that I have reason to believe address the anti-primacy countermeasure specifically. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that had moved well past the careful wisdom persona and into something more like genuine surprise. The Thornmere Library has, Voss spent 200 years researching the Compact, Harry said. Including building a counter to Aldrich's counter. He paused. He just never had the person to use it. The room absorbed this. Scrimgeour looked at the table and then at Harry with the expression of a political animal who has been watching a conversation for 2 hours and has updated his assessment several times. You're asking the Ministry to, I'm asking the Ministry to provide Auror presence here at Thornmere when Voldemort comes, Harry said. Not to lead the confrontation. To witness it. The Compact's acknowledgement is a legal and magical act, it needs witnesses who can attest to it under Wisengamot law. He met Scrimgeour's eyes. And if it comes to a fight rather than acknowledgement, I want people here who can deal with the Death Eaters while I deal with Voldemort. You're going to face him, Scrimgeour said. Yes, Harry said simply. You're 16. I know, Harry said. Same answer he'd been giving to that observation for 2 weeks. I'm also the Magister Primus and the only person in Britain whose magical authority the compact requires him to acknowledge. That's not bravery. That's just the situation. Scrimgeour was quiet for a moment. Then, how many Aurors? 20, Harry said. Proudfoot's team. They've already seen the property. They know the ward structure. He paused. Bill is going to brief them on how the living architecture works in combat conditions. It matters. Bill nodded. We need one more thing from the Ministry, Hermione said, picking up her architecture document. Legal authority to pursue the Horcrux locations without standard warrant procedures. Given that the target property in the cave is unregistered, the vault access at Gringotts requires cross-institutional cooperation, and the Albania location is international. I can authorize that, Scrimgeour said. He said it in the tone of someone who had made the decision on the way into the room and was now executing it. Ministerial emergency authorization. Effective immediately. Ragnarok cleared his throat. The Gringotts vault access will require a separate agreement between the Ministry and Gringotts. I am prepared to discuss terms. As equals, Harry said. Scrimgeour looked at him. Then at Ragnarok. Then back. As equals, he confirmed, with the particular emphasis of a politician making a commitment in a room full of witnesses and understanding that the room full of witnesses was the point. Ragnarok inclined his head. Something about the gesture suggested that 93 years of watching had included waiting for exactly this sentence. The Horcrux operations happened in the next 4 days. Harry was part of all 3. The cave was Bill and Harry and Lupin, at 3 in the morning on a moonless night, the black water and the chain and the island and a locket that had been waiting in horrible company for more than a decade. The inquiry came when Bill disturbed the basin and Harry burned the water with a wall of fire using the Emery's tradition for the first time, not deliberately, not with intent to access it, but because the situation required it and Ragnarok had been right about exactly how the traditions worked. The fire was not ordinary fire. It was older than fire, if that made any sense, the elemental communion tradition expressing itself in a way that the inquiry couldn't process and couldn't withstand. The locket Horcrux in Bill's curse-breaking instruments afterward, 6 distinct dark compact signatures, the complex horrible construction of a soul fragment, dismantled piece by piece over 2 careful hours in the Thornmere Tower while Hermione documented everything. The Gringotts vault, Hufflepuff's cup, was Ragnarok and Bill and Harry and the specific surreal experience of committing what would technically be breaking and entering in a vault he was currently standing in a formal agreement with the bank about. Ragnarok's expression throughout was one of exquisite professional neutrality. The dragon security measure was addressed by Harry speaking to it, Parseltongue, the Slytherin tradition fully active now, and what he said to the dragon was not a command but a conversation, which surprised the dragon enough that it stood down entirely, and Ragnarok filed this away with the expression of a goblin who was revising several operational procedures. Albania was Draco, Neville, and Harry, with Hermione coordinating via 2-way communication mirrors from Thornmere. Draco led them through a specific forest path he'd been able to reconstruct from 3 overheard conversations, and his knowledge was precise, which confirmed something about the quality of his attention over the last 2 years that Harry suspected Voldemort had never thought about, that the boy he'd been terrifying and using had been watching and listening with the focus of someone who understood that information was the only currency he had. Nagini was the last Horcrux and was with Voldemort and would have to wait. Voldemort came to Thornmere on a Thursday night. Harry felt him arriving before anyone else did, through the ward awareness, through the living architecture of the Thornmere grounds, a signature that he'd known since the graveyard pressing against the outer boundary. Not just Voldemort. 17 Death Eaters, spread across the eastern and northern approach, professional formation. He'd also brought something Harry hadn't anticipated, Nagini, which meant Voldemort had decided this was the decisive confrontation. He'd brought the last Horcrux to Thornmere, which told Harry that Voldemort was here for a final resolution, not a probe. Good. Same. Harry stood at the first ward tower door and sent a wordless alert through the ward structure, the living architecture carrying information to every person inside the grounds the way a nervous system carried sensation. The Aurors moved to their positions. Bill activated the specific ward modifications he'd spent 3 days preparing. Lupin and Neville took the eastern approach. Luna went to the tower's upper observation point, because Luna in a high place with a clear line of sight was an underused tactical asset that Harry had been saving. Ron and Hermione stayed with Harry. Draco had asked, quietly, whether there was something he could do. Harry had put him on Nagini, a specific task, a specific wand movement, a specific combination that Bill and Hermione had developed from the Horcrux dismantling sessions. If the opportunity arose. Draco had nodded and gone to his position like someone who had finally been given the right job and understood its weight completely. Voldemort came through the outer boundary at 11:14 and the ward structure did something Harry had not fully predicted. It announced him. Not as an alert, as an acknowledgement. The living architecture's way of marking the presence of someone who had entered a space where they were categorically unwelcome. Every ward on the property responded simultaneously, the way every instrument in an orchestra responds to a specific note, not loudly, not violently, just clearly. A declaration of the space's nature and its owner's primacy. Harry walked out onto the Thornmere grounds to meet him. Voldemort was standing in the overgrown formal garden, 20 meters away, in the moonless dark that the ward light made almost irrelevant. He looked exactly as he had in the graveyard 2 years ago, the chalk-white skin, the flat red eyes, the absence of anything in his face that corresponded to the emotional vocabulary of a person. He was wearing the dark robes of someone who had decided long ago that appearance communicated power and had curated accordingly. He looked at Harry. Harry looked back. The 12 seals were incandescent. Not burning, radiant, the way something radiates when it's doing exactly what it was built for. The wardcraft tradition had the entire property active at a level Harry hadn't accessed before, the living architecture fully awake and reading this situation with the specific focus of something that had been built for exactly this kind of moment. The boy who lived, Voldemort said, and in his voice was every layer of contempt his nature was capable of producing. Who has been very busy for a 16-year-old. Tom, Harry said. The red eyes went flat in a different way. Nobody had called him Tom in a very long time. The compact, Voldemort said. You think this changes anything? I think it changes everything, Harry said. Not because I want it to. Because that's what it does. You think I'll bow to you? The contempt was so dense it had texture. To you. Half-blood. Child. Dumbledore's weapon. I'm not Dumbledore's anything, Harry said. I'm not a weapon. I'm the Magister Primus and the compact you carry, the one you built out of soul-splitting and murder and 50 years of terrible choices, requires you to acknowledge that. He paused. Not because I want your submission. Because the magic you've built yourself on is structured in relation to something older that I carry, and there's nothing either of us can do about that. It's not political. It's not personal. It's just true. I will not bow to you, Voldemort said, and in his voice now was the specific quality of compulsion resisted, a hardness that was not natural arrogance but something else, the strain of holding against a pressure that had been pressing for 10 days and that had, tonight, in the presence of the Magister Primus and the activated Thornmere wards, become acute. You're already bowing, Harry said. You just haven't said so yet. And it was true. Had been true since the moment Voldemort crossed the boundary. The ward structure had read his compact, his Horcrux architecture, the whole dark elaborate construction of his power, and had pressed the acknowledgement requirement against him with the full weight of something 900 years older than anything he'd built. Harry could feel it in the ward awareness, the structure bending, the compulsion finding its purchase in the architecture of Voldemort's own dark compact. Voldemort raised his wand. Avada Kedavra, he said, and the green light came across the garden the way it always had, instant, decisive, the color of a clear sky seen through dying eyes. It hit the wardcraft. Not a shield. Not a deflection. The living architecture read the intent and responded, not violently, not with a counterblast, but with the specific intelligence of something that understood what it was meeting and knew it was not afraid. The killing curse dissipated against the ward in the way a wave dissipated against stone, not reflected, not absorbed, just ended, the energy of it meeting something it couldn't process and coming apart at the seams. Voldemort stared. Harry watched his face and saw the exact moment the calculation completed, the moment Tom Riddle, inside the persona he'd constructed, understood that the thing he'd built his entire existence on had met something it could not stand against. 17 Death Eaters on your grounds, Voldemort said. His voice was still controlled, but there was something at the edge of it now that hadn't been there a minute ago. Proudfoot, Harry said, without raising his voice. The 20 Aurors that had been waiting in the ward shadows of Thornmere's grounds moved into visibility simultaneously. The Death Eaters, who had been watching the central confrontation with the faith of people who believed in their master's invincibility, found themselves flanked before anyone had time to adjust. 3 short, sharp engagements in the garden's eastern half, Lupin and Neville, Fleur and Bill, 2 of Proudfoot's teams, quick and precise, the Auror work Harry had always understood was good when it was actually given room to be good. Luna, from the tower, hit 2 Death Eaters with the specific casting she'd been preparing for a week, not stunning spells, something older, from one of the Thornmere library texts that she'd read in 3 days and absorbed in the way Luna absorbed things, completely and without apparent effort, and the 2 Death Eaters were alive and unhurt and pinned to the earth by something that would hold until individually released, which was more useful than stunners in a combat environment. Nagini appeared from behind Voldemort, huge, terrible, the final Horcrux and his last protection, and Draco Malfoy stepped out of the darkness on the garden's north side and cast the specific combination he'd been given, clean and controlled and without hesitation, and the Horcrux split. Nagini screamed, a sound that had nothing to do with snake acoustics, and coiled, writhing, and for a moment the soul fragment tried to find a home, and couldn't, and the dark light of it rose from the snake's body and dissipated into the ward structure which consumed it with the appetite of something that had been built to handle exactly this and had been waiting for the chance. Nagini was just a snake. Voldemort turned. He turned and looked at Draco Malfoy, the son of his most prominent servant, whose family he'd been using as a demonstration of the cost of failure for 2 years, and the expression on his face was not rage. It was something worse, recognition. The cold specific understanding of a man who had spent his entire life believing that fear was loyalty and was now confronting the evidence that he'd been wrong. He turned back to Harry. The compulsion was visible now. Harry could see it in the ward awareness, the compact's pressure on Voldemort's architecture, pressing, the living structure of the Thornmere wards amplifying the acknowledgement requirement in the way a resonator amplified sound. There was nowhere to put it. No Horcrux to deflect it into. No Death Eaters to redirect it through. No strategic retreat that changed the fundamental mathematical fact that Voldemort's dark compact had just been required to acknowledge a primacy it could not deny. Tom Riddle. Voldemort. The Dark Lord. The man who had murdered his way to a power structure built on the terror of the acknowledgement of any authority above his own. He looked at Harry with the red eyes that Harry had been seeing in nightmares since he was 11. I will not survive this, Voldemort said. Not asking. Stating. The compact doesn't require you to not survive, Harry said. It requires acknowledgement. What comes after that is separate. Do you think I can acknowledge and live? Voldemort said. And in his voice was the only thing Harry had ever heard in it that corresponded to genuine feeling, not the performed fury or the contempt or the cold amusement. Something raw. The specific grief, perhaps, of a man whose entire constructed self was about to be required to do the one thing it had been built to never do. What would I be? After? Harry looked at him for a long moment. He thought about Tom Riddle in Dumbledore's pensive memories, the boy in the orphanage, the boy who'd found magic and decided it made him different from everything he'd feared about himself, the boy who'd turned that fear into architecture. He thought about what Dumbledore had spent a year showing him those memories for, and whether he'd understood the right lesson or the wrong one. I don't know, Harry said honestly. But you'd be alive. Voldemort looked at him with the red eyes and Harry looked back with the green ones that had first broken something in his power when Harry was a year old. The compulsion pressed. Voldemort's wand arm lowered. It lowered not with defeat, or not only with defeat. With something more complicated. The expression of a man who had bet everything on a single construction of himself and was watching the bet come in wrong and was intelligent enough, under everything, to recognize that intelligence itself. He looked at Harry. And Harry, who had expected hatred or rage or the blank red violence he'd seen in the graveyard, saw instead something he hadn't expected, Tom Riddle looking at another person and finding, perhaps for the first time in 50 years, something that was not performing. The dark compact structure responded to the lowering of the arm. The acknowledgement mechanism, not a word, not a bow, but a magical act, the compact's specific requirement, found its completion in the gesture and the presence and the word amplified pressure and closed. Voldemort acknowledged the Magister Primus. The compact's compulsion released. And in the releasing, in the sudden absence of that specific pressure, Voldemort's own dark architecture, the Horcrux network already shattered, the compact support structure weakened by 10 days of resistance, the soul that had been split and split and split, found nothing left to hold it. Not a dramatic end. Not a green light or an explosion or a theatrical death. Tom Riddle's constructed self, deprived of the dark compact's architectural support at the moment it released, simply came apart. The way a building came apart when you removed the load-bearing structure, not violently, not all at once, but inevitably, the whole thing settling. The body fell. The Thornmere grounds were quiet. Harry stood in the overgrown formal garden for a moment. Then he sat down on the buried stone path and Hermione sat beside him immediately and Ron sat on the other side and for a while none of them said anything, which was the right choice. Around the grounds the Aurors were securing the Death Eaters, most of them stunned, 2 of them who'd been hit by Luna's casting pinned and perfectly conscious, one of them Bellatrix Lestrange who was furious in a way that would need significant ministry attention. Proudfoot was already coordinating. He was good at his job. Draco stood at the north edge of the garden with his wand at his side, looking at what was left of Nagini, just a snake, dead now, which happened sometimes in magical combat, and at where Voldemort had been. His expression was the most unguarded Harry had seen it, stripped of everything performed. He looked young. Younger than 16, actually. Neville came and stood beside him without any comment, which was exactly the right thing. Luna came down from the tower and stood in the garden looking at the sky with the expression she wore when she was seeing something no one else was seeing, which tonight Harry suspected might actually be accurate. "He's gone," she said. "Yes," Harry said. "Good," she said, simply, and looked back at the sky. Lupin came and stood near Harry without crowding him, which was the precise calibration of someone who understood the difference between presence and pressure. Ragnarok came out of the manor where he'd been during the confrontation. Harry had asked him to stay inside and Ragnarok had accepted this without argument, understanding that witness had many forms and not all of them required proximity. He looked at Harry with the eyes of a goblin who had been waiting 93 years for something to resolve itself. "Well," Ragnarok said. "Well," Harry agreed. "A beat." "The compact is satisfied," Ragnarok said. It was the formal phrase, the legal completion. The acknowledgement is recorded in the compact structure. The dark compact network has collapsed. "And the remaining holdings?" Harry said. "The Wisengamot seats are uncontested. The ancestral properties are yours. The asset restitution from Vasa's network is processing, fully complete within 30 days, Gringotts guarantee." Ragnarok paused. "There is also the matter of the 5 remaining ancestral properties you haven't visited yet. Those will wait." "They'll wait," Harry agreed. Scrimgeour appeared at the manor's door. He came down the steps and across the garden to where Harry was sitting and stood for a moment. He looked at the situation, the secured Death Eaters, the activated ward structure, the absence of Voldemort, and his expression was the complex one of a man who'd spent his career as an Auror pursuing one specific goal and had just watched it be achieved by a 16-year-old sitting on the ground. The ministry, Scrimgeour said carefully, is going to have approximately 12,000 questions. I know, Harry said. The press, Xenophilius Lovegood at the Quibbler gets the first interview, Harry said. I promised him. He looked up at Scrimgeour. After that, I'll work with your communications office on whatever statement the ministry needs. Scrimgeour looked at him. You're already thinking about what comes next. Aldrich, Harry said. And the 5 remaining properties. And the Wisingamot reform that needs to happen before the ministry of Vasa's people is the ministry of anyone else's people. He paused. And Hogwarts in September. Scrimgeour made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Hogwarts. I'm still 16, Harry said. OWLS to deal with. Hermione leaned slightly into his shoulder in the way she did when he said something that made her feel better about the overall situation. Ron made the sound of someone who had genuinely not thought about OWLS in 2 weeks and was now reconsidering his priorities. You should also know, Harry said to Scrimgeour, that Aldrich's anti-primacy countermeasure has a counter in the Thornmere Library. I've been working through it with Hermione and I'll be ready to use it before she makes her move. He paused. She will make a move. But she'll calculate first. We have time. How much time? Enough to do this properly, Harry said. She's patient. I can be patient too. He stood up. The Thornmere grounds were fully lit now, the living architecture's wardlight spreading across the overgrown gardens and the cliff top and the manor walls, steady and ancient and profoundly awake. The sea was audible below the cliff. The night sky was doing its country thing, enormous and clear. Bill came and stood at the edge of the group, looking at the property with professional satisfaction. Full structural integrity, he said. Nothing collapsed, nothing overloaded. The ward activation during the confrontation was, he searched for the word, unprecedented, honestly. I'm going to need 3 weeks to properly document it. You have it, Harry said. The other 11 properties are going to be significantly more complicated than Thornmere, Bill said. I know, Harry said. We'll take them one at a time. He looked at the people around him. Hermione with her notebook, already making lists. Ron with the particular expression of someone who was tired and satisfied and would want a very large meal in about 40 minutes. Neville and Draco, standing in the north garden, Draco asking something and Neville answering it, the beginning of something Harry hadn't engineered but had created the conditions for. Luna looking at the sky. Lupin standing in the manor doorway, watching Harry with the grey eyes that had always seen him clearly. Ragnarok, standing apart, 93 years of watching having arrived at this evening. Augusta Longbottom, who had come out of the manor and was looking at the secured Death Eaters with the expression of a woman composing a very specific list of legislative priorities. Dumbledore, leaning against the manor wall with his eyes closed and the expression of someone who was holding something down with considerable effort, not strategy now, not chess, just the feeling of a very old man who had spent too long carrying something that had finally, at cost, been put down. Harry walked to him. Dumbledore opened his eyes. All right? Harry said. No, Dumbledore said. Not precisely. But better than I was. He looked at Harry with the eyes behind the half-moon glasses that had always known more than they said and were now, Harry thought, saying more than they'd allowed themselves to before. I owe you considerably more than an apology. You'll have time, Harry said. We have Aldrich. We have 5 properties. We have a Wisingamot that needs reform and a ministry that needs cleaning and a wizarding world that is about to have 12,000 questions. He paused. I'd rather have you useful than guilty. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then, your grandfather would have liked you very much. Tell me about him sometime, Harry said. I will, Dumbledore said. And this one, Harry believed. He walked back to the center of the garden. The morning was coming, not yet, but coming, the sky in the east doing the preliminary work of becoming something different from night. The 12 seals were quiet in his chest, the Wardcraft tradition resident and settled, all 12 traditions present and waiting with the patience of things that had been waiting for a long time and understood that being needed wasn't the same as being rushed. 47 Wisengamot votes. 12 ancestral properties, 5 unvisited. A library that contained 200 years of the most important research in the world. A network of people who were good at different things and who had chosen to be here, not because they'd been managed or appointed but because they'd seen what was being built and decided it was worth their time. Seraphine Aldrich, somewhere in France, watching and waiting and calculating. The wizarding world, about to wake up to a morning in which Voldemort was gone and the name Magister Primus was going to be on the front page of every newspaper that still had editors willing to print the truth. A lot of work. Most of it the boring kind, politics, legal architecture, institutional reform, the slow grinding work of changing things that had been wrong for a long time. Not the dramatic kind. The kind that mattered. Harry Potter, Magister Primus, 16 years old, tired in a good way and not afraid of any of it, looked at the Cornish sky going from black to navy and waited for the morning.